The morning the first ghost signal bled through the encrypted frequency at FOB Gambury. Specialist Maya Thorne was sitting at a folding card table in the corner of the Tactical Operations Center, nursing a lukewarm cup of Maxell House, and counting the distinct, rhythmic clicks of a malfunctioning air conditioning unit that 3 different IT specialists had already sworn was working perfectly. It was 0342 on a Tuesday in late August, the kind of hour where the desert air outside was finally cool enough to be breathable. But inside the windowless TOC, the heat from 100 servers and monitors created a stagnant, electric soup that smelled of ozone and unwashed polyester. Maya was officially an information systems coordinator, a title that, in the hierarchy of the 10th Mountain Division, translated roughly to the woman who resets the passwords and makes sure the colonel's printer doesn't jam. To the guys in the S6 signal shop, men like Chief Warrant Officer Miller and Sergeant Peterson, she was a glorified secretary who had somehow lucked into a tech MOS because she could type 80 words a minute without looking at her hands. She didn't correct them. Maya had learned long ago, back in Youngstown, Ohio, watching her father navigate the slow death of the steel mills, that there was a strategic advantage in being underestimated. If people didn't think you were capable of much, they didn't look too closely at what you were actually doing. And what Maya was doing, in the quiet gaps between filing property accountability forms and updating the duty roster, was listening. She didn't just hear the radios, she heard the architecture of the noise. To Maya, the electronic spectrum wasn't an abstract concept of waves and frequencies. It was a physical texture, like the grain of the oak planks her grandfather used to sand in his workshop. She could hear the shape of a transmission before she ever decoded the content. She knew the distinct, jagged burr of a faulty Russian-made handheld used by local insurgents, and she knew the smooth, liquid thrum of a secure American SATCOM burst. She sat in her plastic chair, her back perfectly straight, her eyes fixed on a spreadsheet that listed the serial numbers of every ruggedized laptop on the base. To anyone walking by, she was the picture of military administrative boredom. But her headset was cracked open just a hair, tuned not to the official command net, but to the white noise of the wide spectrum bleed over. That was when she heard it. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't even a recognizable signal. It was a rhythmic dip in the ambient static, a cadence of silence that repeated every 2 seconds. It was so subtle that the automated filters in the server racks ignored it as atmospheric interference, but to Maya, it felt like a cold finger tracing a line down her spine. It was a heartbeat. Not a human one, but a digital one, a keep-alive signal for a high-end encryption protocol that shouldn't have existed within 50 miles of this province. She didn't move. She didn't gasp. She simply reached out with her right hand, the one hidden from the view of the main floor by a stack of manila folders, and tapped a sequence of keys on her secondary monitor. The screen remained dark, but the hard drive gave a tiny, almost imperceptible whir as it began to log the raw data. She took a sip of her coffee, the grit of the grounds catching between her teeth. In the center of the room, Chief Miller was laughing at a joke Peterson had just told, his boots propped up on a desk covered in half-disassembled radio components. Miller was 45, with a gut that strained against his OCP top, and the kind of arrogance that came from 20 years of being the smartest guy in a room full of people who didn't know a motherboard from a cutting board. "Thorne," Miller barked, not looking at her. "The coffee in the pot is starting to taste like battery acid. Fix it." "Roger, Chief," Maya said. Her voice was flat, professional, and entirely devoid of the irritation that should have been there. She stood up, her movements efficient and controlled. As she walked toward the break corner, she passed the main signal mapping display, a massive screen showing the real-time status of every friendly unit in the sector. Her eyes swept over the blue icons. There was a convoy, Supply Run 4 Alpha, scheduled to roll out at 0600. 32 vehicles, mostly unarmored LMTVs and a handful of up-armored Humvees, carrying fuel and food to a remote outpost near the border. It was a routine milk run through a valley that had been quiet for months. As she poured the old coffee into a plastic bucket, the smell of burnt beans filled her nose, mixing with the metallic tang of the air conditioning. She looked back at her darkened monitor. The heartbeat was still there. 14. 2 seconds. It was a precise interval, too precise for insurgent hardware. This was something industrial, something sophisticated. and it was hovering right on the edge of the frequency used by the Convoy's short-range tactical comms. Maya Thorne grew up in a house where silence was a survival skill. Her father, a man of few words and a heavy hand when the whiskey ran low, didn't value opinions. He valued the way a lathe turned a piece of raw steel into a piston. He valued tolerances measured in microns. If you're going to open your mouth, you'd better be able to prove what comes out of it with a micrometer, he used to tell her. She had spent her teenage years in his garage, rebuilding engines by the sound of the valves. She could tell if a cylinder was misfiring before the check engine light even flickered. That sensory precision had followed her into the Army. While the other recruits in her AIT class were memorizing manuals, Maya was learning the smell of a hot processor and the weight of a data packet. When she finished making the new pot of coffee, she didn't go back to her desk. Instead, she walked over to Peterson's workstation. Peterson was a corporal, 22 years old, with a technically inclined tab on his shoulder and a permanent smirk. He was currently playing a pirated version of a first-person shooter on a secure terminal, his fingers dancing across the keys. "Corporal Peterson," Maya said softly. He didn't look up. "Unless the internet is down, Thorne, I don't care." "I think there's a skip in the wideband receiver," she said, her voice steady. "I caught a rhythmic pulse on the 420 megahertz range. It looks like an unauthorized handshake." Peterson snorted, finally pausing his game to look at her. His eyes were bloodshot from too much screen time and not enough sleep. "A handshake? On 420? That's commercial band stuff, Maya. It's probably just a local cell tower in Kabul bouncing off the ionosphere, or some kid with a walkie-talkie. Go back to your spreadsheets. Leave the signal analysis to the guys who actually have a clearance for it." "It's repeating every 2 seconds, she persisted. "That's a standard interval for a military-grade AES 256 burst synchronization." Peterson laughed, loud enough to catch Chief Miller's attention. "Hear that, Chief? The secretary thinks she found a high-level encryption burst on the trash frequencies. She's been reading too many Tom Clancy novels." Miller didn't even take his boots off the desk. He just tilted his head back and looked at Maya with a weary, paternalistic disdain. "Specialist, I appreciate the enthusiasm, truly. It's nice to see you taking an interest in the hardware, but that receiver hasn't been calibrated in 6 months because it's useless. We keep it on because regulations say we have to. You're seeing ghosts in the machine. Now, did you finish the property book for the 1st Brigade?" "I did, Chief. It's on your zipper drive." "Good, then how about you focus on making sure the morning brief slides are formatted correctly? The Colonel hates it when the fonts don't match." Maya nodded once. "Roger, Chief." She walked back to her desk. Her pulse was steady, but her hands felt cold. She sat down and looked at her dark monitor. She didn't need the screen to see the data anymore. She could feel it. The heartbeat was still there, but it had changed. The interval was now 14.1 seconds. It was accelerating, just slightly, like a runner warming up before a sprint. She knew what it was now. It wasn't a communication signal. It was a trigger. Somewhere out in the darkness of the Afghan night, buried in the dust beside a road that 32 American vehicles were about to drive down, a sophisticated electronic initiator was syncing its clock with a master controller. And it was using the American base's own ambient electronic noise to hide its signature. It was brilliant. It was elegant. And it was going to kill a lot of people in exactly 2 hours. Maya Thorne was 24 years old, and she had never fired her weapon in combat. She was the person who stayed behind the wire. She was the person who kept the records. But as she watched the 0400 hour tick over on the wall clock, she felt a familiar, cold clarity settle over her. It was the same feeling she got when she was 14, and she realized her father's truck was going to blow a head gasket if he tried to drive it to the mill. She had tried to tell him then, and he had told her to shut up and get him a beer. 10 minutes later, he was stranded on the side of the interstate with a ruined engine. The stakes here were higher than a rusted-out Ford F-150. She looked around the TOC. It was a room full of experts, men with degrees in computer science and certifications that filled whole binders, men who had been to the specialized schools at Fort Gordon. And yet they were blind to the most dangerous thing in the room because it didn't fit the pattern they expected. They expected the enemy to be loud, chaotic, and technologically primitive. They expected the enemy to shout over open radios and use crude pressure plates. They weren't prepared for a silent, encrypted heartbeat. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of velvet. Inside was a tiny, precision-ground jeweler's loop. It had been her grandfather's. She didn't use it for looking at diamonds. She used it to inspect the pins on motherboards to find the microscopic fractures that caused unexplainable system failures. She held it in her palm for a moment, the weight of it grounding her. She wasn't just a secretary. She was the daughter of a man who could hear a 10,000th of an inch of deviance in a spinning shaft. She was a Thorne, and Thornes didn't guess. She opened a terminal window on her primary computer, the one that was being logged by the base's security protocols. She knew she was breaking every rule in the book. She began to write a script. It was a simple piece of code, really. It was a noise floor subtractor. It would take the ambient electronic signature of FOB Gambury, the hum of the servers, the chatter of the official radios, the leak from the microwave in the break room, and invert it. If she could overlay the inverted noise onto the raw signal she was receiving, the only thing left would be the anomaly. Her fingers moved with a blurring, rhythmic speed. Asterisk, click, clack, click. Asterisk, it was a dance. She wasn't thinking about the code. She was feeling the shape of the silence she was trying to isolate. "Thorne, what are you doing?" It was Peterson. He had wandered over, likely to see if she was actually working on the slides. He leaned over her shoulder, his breath smelling of stale energy drinks. He looked at her screen, his eyes narrowing as he saw the lines of Python code scrolling past. "Just cleaning up some data, Corporal," Maya said, her voice like glass. The database for the property book had some corrupted headers. Peterson squinted. "That doesn't look like SQL. Why are you using a fast Fourier transform on a property book?" "It's a more efficient way to sort the serial numbers," she said. She didn't look at him. She kept typing. "It filters out the non-numeric characters automatically." Peterson hesitated. He knew just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to realize she was lying through her teeth. He wanted to call her out, but if he did, and she was right about it being a more efficient way, he'd look like an idiot. That was the beauty of the glorified secretary label. He assumed she was just doing something tedious and complicated because she didn't know a simpler way. "Whatever," he said, turning away. "Just don't crash the server. I'm right in the middle of a raid." "I wouldn't dream of it," Maya whispered. She hit asterisk, enter asterisk. The screen flickered. For a second, nothing happened. Then a single sharp line appeared on the graph. It wasn't a wave, it was a spike, a vertical needle of pure, concentrated energy, and next to it the decoded metadata began to populate. Asterisk origin, remote. Protocol, proprietary. Destination, local cluster. Status, armed. Asterisk Maya's breath hitched. It wasn't just one IED. It was a local cluster. A chain of explosives, likely daisy-chained together, all waiting for a single encrypted command to detonate in sequence. A kill zone that would stretch for a quarter mile. She looked at the time. 0445. The convoy would be at the motor pool now. Drivers would be doing their pre-checks, checking oil levels and tire pressures. Soldiers would be throwing their rucks into the back of the LMTVs, joking about the dust and the heat. In 75 minutes, they would be rolling toward the gate. Maya stood up. This time, she didn't go to Peterson. She went straight to the center of the room, to the raised platform where Chief Miller sat. She didn't wait for him to acknowledge her. "Chief," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the room like a blade. "You need to look at this, now." Miller looked up, surprised by the tone. It wasn't the voice of a specialist. It was the voice of a commanding officer. He slowly took his feet off the desk. "Specialist, I told you." "I'm not seeing ghosts, Chief," she interrupted. "I've isolated the signal. It's an encrypted trigger for a daisy-chained IED cluster. It's sitting on the 420 MHz band, hiding in the noise floor. It's armed, and it's positioned on the route for supply run 4 Alpha. Miller stared at her. The room went quiet. The other 3 technicians in the signal shop turned in their chairs. Peterson stopped clicking his mouse. The air in the TOC suddenly felt very thin. "Show me," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. Maya led him back to her desk. She didn't explain how she'd written the code or how she'd bypassed the security protocols. She just pointed at the spike on the screen. "That's the heartbeat, every 14 seconds now. It's syncing with a command and control node, probably a high-gain antenna hidden in the hills. When the convoy enters the kill zone, the signal will shift to a continuous wave and the whole valley will go up." Miller leaned in, his eyes scanning the data. He was a tech, and despite his arrogance, he knew what he was looking at. He saw the AES 256 headers. He saw the proprietary handshake. He saw the armed status. His face went pale, the ruddy color draining out of his cheeks until he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Where did you get this raw data?" he asked, his voice shaking. "The wideband receiver," Maya said. "The one you said was useless." Miller looked at Peterson. "Did you see this?" Peterson stammered. "I." She said something about a skip, Chief. I thought it was just atmospheric noise. I told her to check the slides. Miller turned back to Maya. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, not as a clerk, not as a secretary, but as something else, something he didn't quite understand. How did you crack the header? That's a 256-bit encryption. Even with a supercomputer, that takes. I didn't crack the encryption, Maya said. I cracked the pattern. The encryption is just the skin. The heartbeat is the nervous system. You don't need to know what the message says to know that the heart is beating. Miller reached for the comms headset on her desk. Get the convoy commander on the line. Stop them before they leave the wire. Wait, Maya said, her hand stopping his. If you broadcast a stop order on the primary net, the enemy will hear it. They're monitoring us. They'll know we found the trigger. They'll just detonate it early or they'll move the nodes. We need to jam the trigger signal first. We need to flood the 420 megahertz band with white noise before they can send the fire command. Miller hesitated. Jamming the 420 band? That'll interfere with half the civilian infrastructure in the valley. It'll knock out the local emergency services the power grid controls. That's a high-level authorization, Thorne. I can't just flip a switch on a hunch. It's not a hunch, Maya said. She looked him dead in the eye. Look at the frequency shift, Chief. It just dropped to 14.0 seconds. They're narrowing the window. They know the convoy is starting its engines. If you wait for authorization, 32 vehicles and 84 soldiers are going to be a memory by sunrise. Miller looked at the screen. He looked at the spike. He looked at the clock. 0502. Peterson, Miller roared. Get the electronic warfare suite online. I want a full spectrum jam on the 420 to 450 range. Now. But Chief, Peterson stuttered, the colonel. I'll deal with the colonel. Move. The TOC erupted into a different kind of energy. The lethargy of the night shift vanished, replaced by the frantic, controlled chaos of a unit under fire. Peterson's fingers were flying now, not on a game, but on the EW controls. Maya stayed at her desk, her eyes locked on the spike. She felt the shift before the computer even registered it. The heartbeat suddenly became erratic. The spike on the graph began to wobble. They're fighting back, Maya said. They're hopping frequencies. They're trying to find a gap in our jamming. I can't cover it all, Peterson shouted. The jammer is overheating. We're pushing too much power into the antennas. Don't cover it all, Maya said, her voice calm and cold. Target the heartbeat. Follow the rhythm. It's not random. It's a Fibonacci sequence on the hop set. 14, 14, 28, 42. Follow the math, Peterson. That's where the next pulse will be. Peterson looked at her, his eyes wide with terror and confusion. What sequence? I don't. Maya didn't wait. She shoved Peterson out of his chair. He tumbled to the floor, but she didn't look back. She grabbed the controls. Her fingers knew the way. She had lived in this world of numbers and patterns since she was a little girl in Youngstown. To her, the frequency hopping wasn't a mystery, it was a song, and she knew exactly what the next note was going to be. She slammed the jammer's focus onto the next predicted frequency. Asterisk target locked. Asterisk the heartbeat spike vanished, swallowed by a wall of American-made white noise. I've got it, she whispered. I've got the heartbeat in a cage. In the center of the room, Chief Miller was on the radio, his voice urgent and low. Convoy 4 Alpha, this is Gambury TOC. Hold your position. Do not, I repeat, do not exit the wire. We have a confirmed electronic threat on your route. Over. The response was crackly, confused. Gambury, this is 4 Alpha. We're at the gate. We have a schedule to keep. What kind of threat are we talking about? Over. A big one, Miller said, looking at Maya. Just stay put. For the next hour, Maya Thorne sat at the EW console. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Every time the enemy signal tried to jump, she was already there, waiting with a hammer of noise to smash it back into the static. It was a duel fought in a dimension that no one else in the room could see, but Maya felt every parry and thrust. She could feel the frustration of the operator on the other side. She could feel their desperation. At 0615, the sun began to peek over the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, flooding the valley with a harsh, golden light. Chief! A voice called out from the other side of the TOC. It was a sergeant from the intelligence section. We've got a predator feed over the 4 Alpha route. You're going to want to see this. Miller and several others crowded around the big screen. Maya didn't move. She couldn't. If she let go for even a second, the heartbeat might find a way through. On the screen, the grainy black and white thermal image of the valley road was visible. It looked peaceful, empty. But then the intel sergeant adjusted the filters. Look there, he said, pointing to a stretch of road between two narrow rock walls. See the heat signatures. They are faint, but they are there. Buried just beneath the surface of the road were 12 distinct hotspots spaced exactly 20 yards apart. They were connected by a thin, glowing line of detonator cord, and at the far end of the chain, tucked behind a boulder, was a larger box, the command and control node. "My God," Miller whispered. "It's a massacre." They were going to wait until the whole convoy was in the gap and then zip it up like a jacket. "Wait," the intel sergeant said. "Look at the node, there's someone there." A tiny, flickering human shape appeared on the screen, crouching behind the boulder. The figure was frantically messing with a handheld device, likely a remote trigger. He stood up, looking around, his movements jerky and panicked. He was pointing the device at the road, then at the sky, then back at the road. "He's trying to fire it," Peterson said, his voice a whisper. "He's trying to fire it and nothing is happening." Maya sat at her console, her fingers steady on the jammer. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel joy. She felt the same cold, metallic weight she had felt when she fixed her father's truck. It was a job. It was a mission. It was the only thing that mattered. "Keep the jam on," Miller ordered. "Call in an air strike on those coordinates. I want that whole hillside erased." 10 minutes later, the screen erupted in a silent, white blossom of fire as a pair of Hellfire missiles found their mark. The human figure and the command node disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. A secondary explosion followed, a massive, rolling fireball that tore through the road, detonating the 12 wides in a chain reaction that shook the floor of the TOC miles away. The room was silent. No one cheered. The weight of what had almost happened was too heavy for celebration. Maya Thorne slowly let go of the controls. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally receding and leaving a hollow, aching fatigue in its wake. She stood up, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. She walked back to her desk in the corner. Her lukewarm coffee was still there. The air conditioning unit was still clicking, asterisk, click, 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 asterisk. Peterson was still standing by the EW console, looking at her with an expression that was halfway between awe and terror. He didn't say a word. Chief Miller walked over to her. He didn't sit down. He stood in front of her desk, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at the property book spreadsheet that was still open on her primary monitor. "Specialist Thorne," he said. Maya looked up. "Yes, Chief." He looked like he wanted to say 100 different things. He looked like he wanted to apologize. He looked like he wanted to ask her how she'd done it. But in the end, he was a soldier, and he knew that words were the cheapest currency in the army. "The morning brief is in 30 minutes, Miller said, his voice thick. "I want you to lead the signal section of the presentation." And Thorne? "Yes, Chief." "Make sure the fonts are exactly how you want them. I don't think the colonel is going to give a damn about the formatting today." He turned and walked away, barking orders at Peterson to get the logs printed for the after-action report. Maya sat down. She took a sip of her coffee. It was cold now, and it tasted like battery acid. She liked it that way. She looked at her secondary monitor. The heartbeat was gone. The silence was pure. But as she started to close her unauthorized windows, she saw something. A small, lingering trace in the data logs. A second signal. Much weaker, much further away. It wasn't a heartbeat, it was a response. Asterisk message received. Initiating phase 2. Asterisk Maya's hand froze on the mouse. The air in the room suddenly felt cold again. She realized with a sinking certainty that bypassed her mind and went straight to her gut that they hadn't stopped the threat. They had only announced that they were listening. She looked at the clock. 0715. She hadn't slept in 24 hours. Her career was likely over the moment the IT security team saw what she'd done to the network. She was still just a specialist. Still just a glorified secretary to 90% of the people on the base. She reached for a fresh notepad and a pen. She began to write down the coordinates of the second signal. She didn't know where they led. She didn't know who was on the other end. But she knew the shape of the noise. And she knew that before this day was over, she was going to have to find it again. Outside, the first of the supply trucks began to roll back into the motor pool, their engines rumbling as they shut down. The soldiers were climbing out, stretching their legs, complaining about the mission being scrubbed for technical reasons. They were alive, and they were annoyed, and they would never know her name. Maya Thorne put the notepad in her pocket, stood up, and went to make a fresh pot of coffee. She had a brief to prepare. The second signal hadn't come from the hills. It had come from inside the base. She stood by the coffee pot, watching the black liquid drip slowly into the carafe. The smell was rich and bitter. She looked through the glass partition of the TOC toward the main gate. A civilian contractor truck was pulling in, carrying a load of shipping containers. The driver was a man she didn't recognize. She watched him hop out of the cab. He was wearing a dusty baseball cap and a high-visibility vest. He looked like 1,000 other contractors on the base. But as he walked toward the administration building, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, black device. He looked at it for a split second, then put it away. Maya felt the world narrow until the only thing she could see was that man's hand. She knew that hand, not the physical shape of it, but the rhythm of his movement. It was the same rhythm as the second signal. She realized then that the wides in the valley hadn't been the primary target. They were a test, a way to see how the base responded, a way to see who was listening, and she had just shown them exactly who she was. She took the coffee pot back to the table, her mind racing. She needed to tell Miller, but Miller was already on the phone with Brigade, taking credit for the S6 team's quick thinking. If she went to him now with another hunch about a contractor, he'd think she was chasing shadows. He'd think she was high on her own success. She had to do this the Thorne way. She had to prove it with a micrometer. She sat back down at her desk and opened the base's personnel directory. She didn't look for the driver. She looked for the network architecture of the administration building. If the signal had come from inside the base, it had used a local relay. She found it in less than a minute. A small, unauthorized wireless bridge tucked into the rafters of the mailroom. It was disguised as a standard Wi-Fi extender. She leaned back, her eyes fixed on the screen. The mailroom was where all the incoming equipment was processed. It was where the new servers for the TOC had been sitting for 3 days before they were installed. A cold, heavy stone formed in her stomach. The heartbeat hadn't been on the 420 megahertz band by accident. It had been there because that was the frequency the base's new secure internal network used for its own diagnostic pings. They weren't just trigger signals, they were backdoors. The enemy wasn't just outside the wire, they were already in the servers. Maya Thorne looked at the stack of manila folders on her desk. She looked at the report she was supposed to be writing. She realized that the glorified secretary was the only person on FOB Gambury who knew that the entire command structure had just been compromised. She didn't hesitate. She reached under her desk and pulled out her rucksack. Inside, tucked into a hidden compartment, was a small, high-capacity hard drive she'd built herself from salvaged parts. She plugged it into the server's main frame. "What are you doing now, Thorne?" It was Miller. He was standing right behind her, his face flushed with the pride of his recent victory. He saw the hard drive. He saw the unauthorized access lights flashing on the rack. "Chief," she said, her voice like iron, "I need you to listen very carefully, and I need you to not say a word until I'm finished." Miller opened his mouth to bark at her, to demand what the hell she was doing with an unencrypted drive in a secure room, but he stopped. He saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't the look of a specialist. It was the look of a woman who had just seen a monster in the dark and was the only one holding a flashlight. "The valley was a distraction," Maya said. "A distraction?" Miller whispered. "Thorne, 12 wides is not a distraction. That was a hit." "No," Maya said. "That was a ping. They wanted to see our EW response. They wanted to see our latency, and while we were all watching the road, they used the mailroom relay to upload a worm into our primary SIPR net." Miller's face went from red to a sickly, pale gray. That's impossible. This system is air-gapped." "It was air-gapped," Maya said, "until we installed the new routers on Saturday, the ones that sat in the mailroom for 72 hours. She pointed to the screen. A new set of code was scrolling past. It wasn't her code this time. It was a sleek, predatory string of commands that was quietly copying every encrypted file in the base's database and prepping them for a high-speed burst transmission. "They're taking everything, Chief. The patrol schedules, the asset lists, the names of every local informant we have, and they're going to send it out in 10 minutes. Miller looked at the clock, 0722. "How do we stop it?" he asked, his voice cracking. "We can't stop the transmission," Maya said. "If we kill the power, the backup batteries will kick in and the worm will just wait for the next boot up. If we try to delete it, it'll trigger a self-destruct on the drives and we'll lose everything." "Then what?" Maya looked at the manila folder on her desk, the one containing the boring, administrative records of the base's trash disposal. "We don't stop the transmission," Maya said. "We feed it garbage." She began to type. Her fingers were no longer a dance, they were a storm. She wasn't just writing code now, she was rewriting the base's entire reality. She was taking the glorified secretary work, the spreadsheets, the property books, the trash manifests, and wrapping them in the encryption headers of the most sensitive intelligence files the Army had. "I'm swapping the data packets," she whispered. "When the burst goes out, they think they're getting the keys to the kingdom. but all they're going to get is 12,000 pages of cafeteria menus and serial numbers for broken office chairs. Miller watched her. He didn't move, he didn't breathe. But Thorne, he said, if they realize it's a decoy, they'll know someone found them. Let them know, Maya said. She hit the final key. By the time they realize it's garbage, I'll have found the source, and this time I'm not just going to jam it. The screen flashed, asterisk transmission complete. Asterisk Maya Thorne sat back in her chair. The room was deathly quiet. She could hear the hum of the servers, the click of the air conditioner, and the sound of her own heart beating at a steady, controlled 64 beats per minute. She looked at Miller. Now, she said, we need to go talk to that truck driver. Miller nodded, his hand reaching for his sidearm. Let's go. As they walked toward the door, Maya grabbed her jeweler's loupe from her desk. She didn't know what was coming next. She didn't know if she would survive the next hour, but she knew one thing for certain. The secretary was done taking notes. The door to the TOC hissed open, and Maya Thorne stepped out into the blinding, unforgiving light of the Afghan morning. The heat hit her like a physical blow, but she didn't flinch. She adjusted the strap of her rifle, her eyes scanning the motor pool for the man in the dusty baseball cap. The cost of being right was starting to add up. She could feel it in the weight of her gear, in the dry sting of her eyes, in the way the world felt fragile, like a piece of thin glass that was about to shatter. But she was a Thorne, and she wasn't done yet. She saw the truck. It was parked near the fuel point. The driver was sitting on the hood, smoking a cigarette, looking at his watch. Maya looked at Miller. Miller looked at her. On you, specialist, Miller said. Maya Thorne started walking. She didn't run, she didn't shout. She just moved with the quiet, terrifying competence of a woman who knew exactly how many microns of deviance it took to break a man's world. The driver looked up as she approached. He saw her uniform. He saw her rank. He saw the glorified secretary he'd been told would be too busy with coffee and spreadsheets to notice a ghost in the machine. He smiled. It was a small, arrogant smile. Maya Thorne didn't smile back. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the jeweler's loupe. She held it up to her eye, not looking at the man, but at the device in his hand. That's a nice trigger, she said, her voice as cold as the Youngstown winter. Too bad you're using the wrong frequency. The man's smile vanished, and for the first time in his life, he realized that he had made a very, very big mistake. He went for the device. Maya was faster. She didn't use her rifle. She used the weight of the rucksack she'd been carrying all night. She swung it with a fluid, practiced motion, the edge of the hard drive casing catching him right under the jaw. The man collapsed. The device skittered across the gravel. Maya picked it up. She didn't look at the driver. She looked at the screen of the trigger. Asterisk signal lost. Error 404. Asterisk she looked up at the mountains where the second signal had been trying to hide. I found you, she whispered. The battle for FOB Gambury had only just begun, but the woman who cracked the code was finally holding the map. She turned to Miller, who was standing over the unconscious driver with a look of utter bewilderment. Chief, Maya said. Yeah, tell the colonel we're going to be late for the brief. We have a war to finish. She didn't wait for his answer. She was already walking toward the administration building, her fingers already beginning to trace the next pattern in the air. The heartbeat was gone, but Maya Thorne could still hear the music, and it was time to play the final movement. The gravel of the motor pool was hot enough to bake bread, the heat radiating through the soles of Maya's combat boots as she looked down at the man she had just leveled. He lay sprawled in the dirt, the dusty baseball cap having rolled away to reveal a scalp that was sunburnt and peeling, a stark contrast to the high-visibility vest that still hummed with the fluorescent orange of a safety protocol he just violated in the most fundamental way. Beside him, the black device, the one Maya had called a trigger, lay in the dust, its screen flickering with the blue light of a failed handshake. Chief Miller stood 3 feet away, his hand still hovering over the holster of his M9, his chest heaving under his OCP top. The silence in the motor pool was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against Maya's eardrums, broken only by the distant, rhythmic thud of a Black Hawk taking off from the flight line a mile away. Thorne, Miller whispered, his voice sounding like it had been dragged over sandpaper. Tell me you didn't just assault a civilian contractor because of a feeling. Maya didn't look at him. She was watching the device. It wasn't a feeling, Chief. It was a 404 error. He was trying to re-establish the uplink to the mailroom relay. If I'd let him finish the sequence, the worm would have executed a secondary bypass. We wouldn't have been feeding them garbage anymore. They would have been inside the firewalls for the CRAM defense systems. Miller took a step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked at the driver, then at the shipping containers on the back of the truck, then back at Maya. "If you're wrong about this, specialist, we're both going to Leavenworth. You know that, right? I just let a junior enlisted soldier strike a Tier 1 logistics contractor in broad daylight in the middle of a secure installation. There's no coming back from this if that's just a garage door opener." "It's not a garage door opener," Maya said. She knelt, her movements precise and deliberate. She didn't touch the device yet. She looked at the man's hands. His cuticles were stained with a specific type of silver-gray grease, the kind used for lubricating high-gain satellite dish gimbals. It wasn't the grease of a truck driver. "He's been setting up the hilltop arrays. He wasn't just a driver, he was the technician for the bridge." She picked up the device, using a clean corner of her uniform to avoid smudging any prints. It was heavier than it looked. She flipped it over and saw a small, hand-etched serial number on the battery casing. It wasn't a manufacturer's mark. It was a coordinate set. Before she could read the numbers aloud, the heavy rumble of a fast-moving vehicle approached. A white Toyota Hilux with MP stenciled on the door skidded to a halt 20 yards away, kicking up a plume of choking, fine-grained dust. Two military policemen jumped out, their rifles at the low ready. Behind them, a black SUV, the kind used by the base command group, pulled in with a slow, predatory grace. Maya stood up, holding the device in plain sight. She didn't tuck it away. She didn't act guilty. She stood the way her father had stood when the mill foreman tried to blame him for a broken crane, shoulders square, eyes level, the truth held like a shield. Colonel Holloway stepped out of the SUV. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of a block of salt, weathered, hard, and entirely devoid of humor. He was 54, a West Point grad who believed in the chain of command the way some people believed in the gospel. He looked at the unconscious man on the ground, then at Miller, and finally his gaze settled on Maya Thorne. "Chief Miller," Holloway said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Explain to me why my signal chief and a property clerk are standing over a bleeding KBR employee in the middle of my motor pool." "Sir," Miller began, his voice surprisingly steady. "Specialist Thorne identified an active electronic threat originating from this individual. He was attempting to trigger a localized network breach that—" "A network breach?" Holloway interrupted, walking toward them. He didn't look at the device in Maya's hand. He looked at the man on the ground. "This is David Vance. He's been on this base for 18 months. He has a secret clearance. He's the lead for the container logistics team, and you're telling me he's a cyber terrorist?" "He's a node, sir," Maya said. Her voice didn't shake. "He was using a proprietary handshake on the 420 megahertz band to bypass the air gap on the SIPR network. He's the one who planted the worm in the mailroom." Holloway turned his gaze to her. It was a look that had withered Major's. "Specialist, I've seen your file. You're an administrative specialist. You're here to keep the books. I'm currently looking at a situation where you have physically assaulted a civilian and disrupted base operations during a high alert status. The S2 and S6 shops have already run a diagnostic on the network. They found nothing. No worm, no breach. Just a few glitches in the logging software which they've already patched. They didn't find it because they were looking for a signature, Colonel," Maya said. "The worm doesn't have a signature. It has a rhythm. It hides in the clock cycles of the processor. Your analysts are looking for a virus. They should be looking for a heartbeat." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "A heartbeat. That's very poetic, Thorne. It's also not a technical explanation that holds water with the Pentagon. Chief Miller, take the specialist's weapon. MPs, take her to the holding cell in the admin block. Miller, you're grounded to your quarters until the JAG officer arrives. I want a full report on how you lost control of your soldier." "Sir," Miller said, taking a step toward Holloway. "With all due respect, Thorne is right. I saw the data." She jammed the IED trigger in the valley. She saved that convoy. The convoy was stopped because of a technical anomaly reported by the signal shop. Holloway snapped. "A report that I'm now beginning to suspect was manufactured to justify this kind of erratic behavior. The wides in the valley were old, probably been there for years. We've had a dozen ghost signals this month. None of them resulted in an assault on a contractor." Maya felt the air leave her lungs. The institutional failure was complete. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was worse. It was a refusal to see. Holloway wasn't a villain. He was a man who trusted his systems more than his people. He trusted the all green on the dashboard because if the dashboard was red, it meant he had failed. And Holloway didn't fail. As the MPs moved in, Maya looked at Miller. For a split second, the hierarchy of the army vanished. They weren't a chief and a specialist. They were two people in a room where the walls were starting to sweat. Miller reached out, not for her rifle, but for the device in her hand. "I'll take it, sir," Miller said to the colonel. "I'll secure the evidence." As Miller's hand closed around the device, he pressed a small, cold object into Maya's palm. It was his chief's challenge coin, a heavy piece of brass with the Signal Corps insignia on one side. But as her thumb traced the edge, she felt a jagged notch he'd filed into the side. *14, 2. He had heard it too. He was letting her go into custody, but he was telling her he was still listening. "Move, specialist," the MP said, gripping her arm. Maya let them lead her away. She didn't struggle. She didn't shout. She watched the dust of the motor pool fade as they walked toward the windowless concrete block of the administration building. The smell of the desert followed her inside. Dust, hot rubber, and the metallic tang of the massive industrial air conditioning units that kept the servers cool while the rest of the base baked. The holding cell was a 4x8-foot room with a single plastic chair and a heavy steel door. There were no bars, just a small, reinforced glass window in the door. Maya sat down. She didn't put her head in her hands. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She closed her eyes and listened. She didn't listen to the sounds of the building, the muffled voices of the clerks, the squeak of rolling chairs, the distant ringing of a phone. She listened to the building's skin. The admin block was the heart of FOB Gambory's nervous system. Thousands of miles of fiber-optic cable and copper wire ran through the walls. Every light fixture, every thermostat, every computer terminal hummed at a specific frequency. To Maya, it was a symphony, but as she sat there, she heard a discordance. The hum of the lights wasn't steady. It had a micro-stutter, every 14 seconds. The worm wasn't just stealing data anymore. It was pulling power. She opened her eyes and looked at the fluorescent light on the ceiling. It looked perfectly normal to the human eye, but Maya saw the flicker. It was a high-frequency pulse, too fast for the optic nerve to process, but her mind caught the rhythm. *14, 14, 28, 42. The Fibonacci sequence. The enemy wasn't just hiding, they were signaling, and they weren't signaling to the hills anymore. They were signaling to the base's own electrical grid. She realized then, with a coldness that settled deep in her marrow, what the Phase 2 message had meant. The wides were a test of the EW response. The data theft was a way to keep them busy. But the true target was the base itself. They weren't going to blow up a convoy. They were going to turn the base into a tomb. If the worm could control the power cycles, it could control the cooling systems for the server racks. If the servers overheated, the fire suppression systems, which used FM-200 gas to displace oxygen, would trigger. In a windowless, air-sealed building like the TOC or the admin block, the gas would kill everyone inside in 90 seconds. It was a silent, automated execution. Maya stood up and went to the door. She tapped on the glass. The MP on guard, a young kid named Miller, no relation to the chief, with a face full of acne and a nervous twitch, looked through the window. "Sit down, specialist," he said, his voice cracking. "I need to speak to Chief Miller," Maya said. "Immediately. Chief's under house arrest, Thorne. You know the rules. Just sit tight. JAG will be here by 1400. 1400 is too late," Maya said, her voice low and urgent. "Listen to the lights, Miller. Can you hear it?" The kid looked up at the ceiling. "Hear what? The hum? It's a building, Thorne. Buildings hum." "It's not a hum, it's a countdown. In less than an hour, the cooling fans in the server room are going to fail. The FM-200 is going to dump. Everyone in this building is going to suffocate because a computer told the air to leave. You need to get me out of this room." The MP laughed, but it was a brittle, unsure sound. "You're the one they said went crazy in the motor pool. My sergeant said you're seeing ghosts. I'm not opening this door for a ghost story." Maya stepped back from the door. She knew she couldn't convince him. The institution had already decided she was broken. She looked at the challenge coin in her hand. She felt the notch. 14, 2. She realized then that Miller hadn't just given her a sign. He'd given her a tool. She knelt by the light switch on the wall. It was a standard, heavy-duty, military-grade switch. She used the edge of the challenge coin, the notched part, as a makeshift screwdriver. Her father had taught her that every machine has a weakness, a place where the tolerances meet the real world. For a light switch, it was the mounting screw. She worked with a frantic, silent speed. Her fingers were raw, the brass of the coin digging into her skin, but she didn't feel it. She felt the screw give. Then the second one. The faceplate came off, revealing the wires behind. She didn't need to cut them, she just needed to bridge them. She looked at the wiring. It was a standard 120-volt circuit. but it was connected to the building's automated lighting controller, the one the worm was currently pulses. She took a deep breath. She knew the risk. If she timed it wrong, she'd blow the breaker and stay locked in the dark. If she timed it right, she waited. She counted. Asterisk 11, 12, 13, 14. Asterisk exactly at the moment of the micro-stutter, she jammed the brass coin across the hot and neutral terminals. A shower of blue sparks erupted, the smell of ozone filling the small cell. The lights in the hallway outside flared with a blinding intensity and then died. "What the hell?" she heard the MP shout. The magnetic lock on the door gave a heavy, metallic asterisk clack asterisk. It was a fail-secure system, but Maya had timed the surge to coincide with the worm's pulse, tricking the controller into thinking there was a fire in the sector. The system did what it was programmed to do. It unlocked the doors for evacuation. Maya pushed the door open. The hallway was filled with a thick gray smoke from the shorted-out switch. The MP was coughing, his hands over his eyes. "Evacuate!" Maya shouted, her voice authoritative. "The fire system is compromised. Get out of the building." The MP didn't question her. In the chaos and the smoke, with the alarm finally beginning to wail, he did what he was trained to do. He headed for the exit. Maya didn't. She turned left, toward the stairs that led to the basement, toward the server core. As she ran, she passed offices where clerks were standing up in confusion, looking at the flickering emergency lights. "Out!" she yelled at them. "Go now." She reached the heavy, reinforced door of the server room. It was locked with a biometric scanner. She didn't have the clearance, she didn't have the thumbprint, but she had the rhythm. She looked at the scanner. It was a high-end unit, the kind that communicated with the central server every few seconds to verify the encrypted key. She placed her ear against the door. She could hear the fans inside. They were screaming. The worm had pushed them to 100% capacity, trying to burn them out. The heat through the door was already noticeable. She took the challenge coin and began to tap on the scanner's casing. She wasn't trying to break it. She was trying to create a vibration that mimicked the heartbeat. Asterisk tap, 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 tap. Asterisk, it was a long shot. It was the kind of thing that only worked in movies or in the mind of a girl who grew up listening to the valves of a Ford engine. But Maya knew that sensors were just ears, and if you sang the right song into an ear, it would believe you. The scanner turned green. The door hissed open, and a wall of heat hit her. It was like stepping into an oven. The temperature in the room must have been 110 degrees and rising. The servers were humming with a frantic, high-pitched whine. Their status lights a solid, angry red. In the center of the room, standing before the main terminal, was a figure she didn't expect to see. It was Corporal Peterson. He wasn't trying to fix the servers. He was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, staring at a laptop that was plugged directly into the core's maintenance port. "Peterson," Maya said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the fans. He looked up. His face was streaked with tears and sweat. "Thorne, how did you? The building is in lockdown. What are you doing here, Peterson?" "I tried to stop it," he sobbed. "Chief Miller told me to check the mailroom logs. He said you were right. I came down here to run a manual override, but as soon as I plugged in the worm, it jumped. It's not just in the zipper anymore, Maya. It's in the environmental controls. It's in everything." He pointed to his laptop. The screen was a blur of scrolling red text. "I can't kill it," Peterson said. "Every time I delete a line of code, it replicates. It's like it's alive. It's learning my keystrokes before I even hit them." Maya walked over to him. She looked at the code. She saw the Fibonacci sequence woven into the logic gates. She saw the beauty of it. It was a masterpiece of digital destruction. "It's not learning your keystrokes, Peterson," Maya said softly. "It's using the server's own internal clock to predict the latency of your inputs. You're fighting a ghost that lives in the time between your heartbeats." "We have to get out of here," Peterson said, grabbing her arm. "The FM-200 is going to dump in 3 minutes. I can't stop the timer." Maya looked at the massive canisters of gas lined up against the wall. They were the size of scuba tanks, filled with enough chemicals to turn the room into a vacuum. "If we leave, the base goes dark," Maya said. "The CRAM goes down, the gates unlock. The enemy is probably 5 minutes away from the wire right now, waiting for the lights to go out." "We can't stay," Peterson yelled. "We'll die." "I'm not leaving," Maya said. She sat down at the terminal. She didn't look at the red text. She closed her eyes. She put her hands on the keyboard. "What are you doing?" Peterson whispered. "I'm going to change the rhythm," Maya said. She didn't try to delete the worm. She didn't try to fight the code. Instead, she began to type a simple, repetitive string of commands. Asterisk null, 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 asterisk. She was adding weight. She was like a musician playing a heavy, slow bass line over a frantic drum solo. She wasn't trying to stop the song, she was trying to drag the tempo down. She typed with a steady, unyielding cadence. Asterisk thump, thump, thump. Asterisk the fans began to slow, not because the worm was dying, but because the processor was being forced to process her null commands in between its own logic cycles. The heartbeat was being forced to skip a beat. The temperature in the room stopped rising. 114 degrees, 113, 112. It's working, Peterson breathed. But the timer, the FM 200 timer is still counting down. He pointed to the wall. The digital display over the gas canisters was at asterisk 0112 asterisk. I can't reach the fire control software, Maya said, her fingers never stopping. The worm has it locked behind a 3-tier encryption. I need someone to manually close the valves on the tanks. Peterson looked at the tanks. They were across the room behind a mesh cage. I don't have the key for the cage. Only the fire marshal has the key. Use your rifle, Maya said. I didn't bring it. I left it in the TOC. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't look away from the screen. Then use the wrench on the maintenance rack. Break the lock, Peterson. Do it now. Peterson scrambled to his feet. He was terrified, a kid from the suburbs who had joined the army for the college money and the cool tech, now facing a life-or-death situation in a room that was about to kill him. He grabbed a heavy pipe wrench from the tool wall and began to hammer at the cage lock. Asterisk clang, clang, clang. Asterisk the sound echoed through the server room, a metallic counterpoint to Maya's typing. Asterisk 0054. Asterisk 0053. Asterisk Maya's fingers were cramping. The heat was making her head swim. She could smell the singed hair on her arms, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. If she stopped for even a second, the worm would regain its momentum and the servers would spike again. I can't break it, Peterson screamed. The lock is too thick. Hit the hinges, Maya yelled. Don't hit the lock, hit the weak point. The tolerances, Peterson. Look at the tolerances. Peterson shifted his aim. He swung the wrench with everything he had, the desperation of a dying man behind every blow. Asterisk crack. Asterisk the top hinge snapped. The cage door groaned and hung at an angle. Peterson squeezed through the gap, his oct snagging on the torn metal. He reached the first tank. Which way do I turn it? He shouted. Right, clockwise, all the way down. Asterisk 0030. Asterisk Peterson began to turn the heavy brass wheel. It was rusted, stuck from years of neglect. He grunted, his face turning purple with effort. It's not moving. Use the wrench, leverage. Peterson jammed the wrench into the spokes of the wheel and pulled. The metal shrieked, but it turned. Asterisk 0020. Asterisk Maya's screen flickered. The worm was fighting back. A new window popped up. Asterisk warning, unauthorized override detected. Initiating system purge. Asterisk the worm is trying to wipe the core, Maya said, her voice a whisper. If it wipes, we lose the base's entire defense grid. Peterson, get those valves closed. Asterisk 0015. Asterisk the second tank was closed. Peterson moved to the third. There were 5 in total. Asterisk 0010. Asterisk 0009. Asterisk Maya saw the purge progress bar. Asterisk 45%, 60%, 75%. Asterisk she did the only thing she could think of. She didn't try to block the purge. She redirected it. She opened a terminal and mapped the purge command to the mailroom relay, the very bridge the enemy was using to control the worm. If you want to wipe something, she hissed, wipe yourselves. She hit asterisk enter asterisk. On her screen, the purge bar hit asterisk 100% asterisk. At the same moment, the timer on the wall hit asterisk 0000 asterisk. There was a heavy, mechanical asterisk thud asterisk from the gas canisters. The solenoid valves clicked open. Maya closed her eyes and waited for the sound of the gas, for the feeling of the air being sucked out of her lungs. Silence. She opened her eyes. Peterson was slumped against the 5th tank, the wrench still in his hand. He was gasping for air, but the air was there. He had closed 4 of the 5 tanks. The 5th one had hissed for a split second before the pressure drop triggered a safety cutoff. The room was still hot. The servers were still humming, but the red lights had turned to a cautious, blinking yellow. Maya looked at her screen. Asterisk connection lost. Relay node offline. Asterisk she had done it. She had used their own weapon to cut the throat of their connection. The worm was still there, but it was blind. It was isolated. It was a heart beating in a vacuum. She sat back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Chief Miller. He was standing there, his face covered in soot, his uniform torn. Behind him were 2 MPs, but they weren't holding their rifles at the ready. They looked stunned. Thorne, Miller said, his voice breaking. You're alive. "The relay is gone, Chief," Maya said, her voice sounding like it belonged to a ghost. "The worm is isolated, but the base is still vulnerable. They're coming. I know they're coming." Miller looked at the terminal, then at Peterson. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand an explanation. He just nodded. "The colonel is at the main gate," Miller said. "The perimeter sensors just went dark. He thinks it's a technical failure. He's about to open the gates to let the civilian contractors evacuate." Maya stood up, her legs shaking. "He can't. If he opens those gates, they're coming through. The evacuation is the attack, Chief. The contractors. They're the ones who are going to open the door from the inside." "The MPs are under orders to follow the colonel," Miller said. "And I'm still technically under house arrest. I only got out because the locks failed when you surged the grid." Maya looked at the challenge coin on the floor. It was blackened, the signal insignia partially melted. "We don't need orders," Maya said. She looked Miller in the eye. "We need to get to the CRAM control station. If the sensors are dark, we have to fire it manually." "Manually?" Miller said. "Thorne, that's a phalanx system. You can't just point and shoot. It's controlled by a fire control radar that's currently infected by your worm." "I don't need the radar," Maya said. She felt the clarity returning, the cold, sharp edge of her grandfather's lathe. "I can hear the engines. I can hear the frequency of the drone controllers. If I can patch the audio feed from the perimeter mics into the CRAM's guidance logic, I can track them by the sound." Miller stared at her. "You're going to hunt drones with a microphone?" "It's just a different kind of rhythm, Chief," Maya said. She didn't wait for him to agree. She grabbed her rucksack and started for the door. As they ran through the admin building, the smoke was clearing, but the chaos was only growing. People were shouting, running in every direction. In the distance, Maya could hear it, the low, rhythmic asterisk thrum asterisk of heavy engines. Not American engines. The sound was jagged, sharp. "They're here," she whispered. They reached the CRAM station, a small, armored hut near the center of the base, topped with a 20 Vulcan cannon that looked like a giant, robotic insect. The technician inside was frantically hitting keys on a dead console. "It's not responding," the tech shouted as they burst in. "The radar is spinning, but it's not painting anything. It's like the sky is empty." "Get out," Maya said. "What, specialist? I have orders." Miller stepped forward, his rank and his soot-covered face providing all the authority he needed. "New orders. Give her the seat." The tech scrambled out. Maya sat down. The console was a mess of error codes. The worm had scrambled the visual interface, replacing the radar sweep with a wall of static. Maya didn't try to fix the screen. She reached under the console and pulled the audio jack for the perimeter acoustic sensors. She plugged it into her headset. The world exploded in her ears. She heard the wind. She heard the distant shouting. She heard the rattle of a loose fence. And then she heard it, the high-pitched whine of a swarm. They weren't large drones. They were small, suicide quadcopters, dozens of them. They were flying low, hugging the ground, staying under the radar's horizon. They were less than 500 yards from the main gate. "Chief," Maya said, her voice perfectly calm, "I need you to rotate the mount, 350 degrees, elevation 10. Miller grabbed the manual override cranks. 350, 10, rotating. The heavy mount groaned as it turned. Maya closed her eyes. She focused on the sound. The whine was getting louder. She could hear the individual motors now. She could hear the slight pitch shift as they banked. 12 degrees right, she said. Lower elevation by 2. Moving. Maya's hand hovered over the manual fire button. It was a big red paddle. She wasn't looking at a screen. She was looking at the inside of her own eyelids. She saw the sound. She saw the swarm as a cloud of jagged points, moving in a coordinated, rhythmic dance. She waited for the sync. The drones were all using the same master clock. Every 14 seconds, they adjusted their position. Asterisk 11, 12, 13. Asterisk fire, she whispered. She slammed her hand down on the paddle. The Vulcan cannon erupted. The sound was like a giant zipper being torn open, a continuous, deafening roar that shook the very foundation of the hut. Red tracers poured into the sky, a stream of fire that looked like a solid beam of light. Maya didn't stop. She moved her head, following the sound, her hand on the joystick, guiding the stream of 20 shells by the feel of the noise. In the distance, she heard the first explosion, then another. A rapid-fire succession of pops and bangs as the suicide drones were shredded by the wall of lead. "You got one?" Miller shouted, looking through the slit in the armor. "No, 3, my God, you're hitting them." Maya didn't answer. She was a Thorne. She wasn't hitting them. She was correcting the deviance. She swept the cannon back and forth, a lethal broom cleaning the sky. The sound in her headset was a chaos of dying motors and exploding batteries. And then a new sound. A heavy, low-frequency roar, a truck moving fast. The gate, Maya gasped, her eyes snapping open. "Chief, the main gate is opening." She looked at the small monitor that was still showing a grainy feed from a backup camera. The colonel was standing by the gate control, his hand on the lever. He was looking at a line of civilian trucks, beckoning them forward. He thought he was saving them. Behind the lead truck, tucked into the shadows of the container, was a massive, improvised explosive device. And standing on the hillside, a mile away, was the man who had the real trigger. Maya realized then that she couldn't hit the truck from here. The angle was wrong. The CRAM was blocked by the admin building. "I have to get to the gate," she said. "Thorne, you'll never make it," Miller yelled. "The swarm is still coming." "There's one left," Maya said, looking at the monitor. "A big one, a command drone. It's carrying the high-gain relay. If I don't kill it, they'll detonate that truck before the colonel can even blink." She grabbed her rifle. She looked at Miller. "Give me your coin," she said. Miller handed her the blackened piece of brass. Maya didn't say thank you. She didn't say goodbye. She burst out of the hut and into the blinding light of the motor pool. The sky was filled with smoke and the smell of cordite. She could see the last drone now. It was larger, a fixed-wing craft circling high above the base. It was the eye in the sky, the one that was coordinating the final blow. Maya started running. She didn't run for cover. She ran toward the admin building's roof access. She could hear the truck engine revving. She could hear the colonel's voice over the loudspeaker telling the drivers to move quickly. She reached the ladder. She climbed, her lungs burning, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She reached the roof. The wind was whipping her hair across her face. She dropped to one knee, raising her rifle. The drone was a tiny speck against the sun. She didn't have a scope. She didn't have a computer. She had the rhythm. She breathed in, she breathed out. She felt the world slow down. She heard the drone's engine, 14 seconds. Every 14 seconds it banked left to stay in its orbit. She counted, *11, 12, 13. The drone began to bank. Maya Thorne pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The sound was tiny compared to the Vulcan cannon, a single, sharp crack in the vast silence of the desert. She didn't wait to see if she hit it. She was already moving, her eyes fixed on the gate. A mile away, the drone's fuel line shattered. A single spark from the engine ignited the vapor. The craft erupted in a small, brilliant ball of orange flame. The relay was gone. The truck at the gate skidded to a halt as its remote-controlled steering went dead. The colonel stopped. He looked at the truck. He looked at the smoking wreckage falling from the sky, and then he looked up. He saw a lone figure standing on the roof of the admin building, a rifle in her hand, the sun behind her like a halo of fire. Maya Thorne stood there for a long moment. She didn't wave. She didn't cheer. She reached into her pocket and felt the cold, notched edge of the challenge coin. She had stopped the attack. She had saved the base. But as she looked out over the horizon, toward the jagged peaks of the mountains, she saw a new signal. A single, steady light, not a heartbeat, a beacon. And she knew with the same certainty she knew the weight of a 20 shell that the man on the hillside wasn't finished. He was just getting started. Maya Thorne lowered her rifle. Her legs finally gave out, and she sat down on the hot gravel of the roof. The silence was back. But it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a fuse that had just been lit. She looked at the time, 0845. The day was only beginning, and the cost of being right was about to become more than she could ever have imagined. She heard a footstep behind her. She didn't turn around. She knew the rhythm. "Thorne," Miller said, his voice soft. "They're not gone, Chief," she said. "I know. They're coming for the core. The worm was just the key. They're coming for the physical drives." Miller sat down beside her. He looked at the smoke rising from the valley. "Then I guess we'd better get ready," he said. Maya looked at the challenge coin in her hand. She closed her fist around it, the metal cutting into her palm. "I'm ready," she whispered. But as she looked at the beacon in the distance, she saw it blink. 3 times, *sauce, it wasn't the enemy. It was someone else, someone who was already out there. And for the first time in her life, Maya Thorne felt a fear that she couldn't measure with a micrometer. Because the signal was coming from her father's old radio frequency. The one he had taught her when she was 6 years old, sitting in a rusted truck in Youngstown, Ohio. The gap had just opened again. And this time, there was no way to close it. The silence on the roof of the administration building was absolute. A stark, vacuum-like contrast to the thunderous roar of the Vulcan cannon that had just ceased its work. Maya Thorne stood with her boots planted in the crunching gravel, the heat of the sun-baked roof rising through her soles. Mixing with the sharp, ozone-heavy scent of the spent casings, she had just rained down onto the motor pool below. Her chest heaved, not with the panic of the fight, but with the mechanical necessity of oxygen, her lungs working like the bellows of a forge. Beside her, Chief Miller was a statue of soot and sweat, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the last of the suicide drones had blossomed into a smudge of black, oily smoke against the relentless blue of the Afghan sky. Below them, the base was a hive of shattered order. She could see Colonel Holloway through the heat shimmer, his silhouette stiff and small by the main gate, staring at the stalled civilian truck that should have been his funeral pyre. The MPs were moving now, their training kicking back in as they swarmed the convoy, pulling drivers from cabs, rifles leveled, the era of trust having ended with a literal bang. But Maya wasn't looking at the gate. She was looking at the jagged silhouette of the Gharib Ghar Mountains, where the steady, rhythmic pulse of the SOS signal continued to blink from the ruins of the old Soviet-era observation post. It wasn't just an SOS. It was a rhythmic signature, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, followed by a specific stuttering pause that lasted exactly 4 seconds. It was a digital fingerprint, a sequence her father had taught her in the damp, grease-stained silence of their garage in Youngstown, back when the world was made of AM radio waves and the hum of a failing alternator. It was a handshake code, something he'd called a asterisk hinterland ghost asterisk. He'd told her it was the only way to talk when the world was trying to drown you out. Thorne, Miller said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that barely broke the wind. The colonel is going to have you in irons in 10 minutes. You just hijacked a CRAM, discharged a weapons system without authorization on a domestic-adjacent target, and violated a dozen standing orders. You need to get down there and start the explanation of your life. I can't, Maya said. She didn't look at him. She was already checking the load in her M4, the metallic asterisk snick asterisk of the bolt seeding home a final, definitive sound. That signal isn't a ghost. It's a call and response. Someone is at OP Whiskey 7, and they're using a frequency that doesn't exist on the Army's current spectrum. Whiskey 7 is a graveyard, Maya. It was decommissioned 3 years ago because the terrain is a tactical nightmare. There's nothing up there but scorpions and bad memories. There's someone up there who knows my father's encryption, Maya said. She turned to look at him, and for the first time, the controlled mask slipped just enough for Miller to see the furnace burning behind her eyes. It wasn't madness. It was a terrifying, absolute clarity. If they have that code, they have the key to the base's backbone, the worm I just isolated. It was a scout. The real payload is at that OP. If I don't get there, the next surge won't just shut down the lights. It'll override the logic gates on the munitions storage. Miller looked at her, his jaw working as he processed the impossibility of what she was saying. He looked at the blackened challenge coin in her hand, then back at the gate where Holloway was already starting to look up toward the roof. If you go over the wire, Thorne, you're a deserter. I can't protect you from that. No one can. I'm not looking for protection, Chief, Maya said. I'm looking for a ride. She didn't wait for his permission. She turned and headed for the roof hatch, her movements blurring with a sudden predatory speed. She didn't use the stairs. She slid down the exterior maintenance ladder, her gloved hands smoking as she hit the ground in the shadow of the motor pool's cooling fans. The air down here was thick with the smell of diesel and the metallic tang of the base's nervous system being fried. She moved through the chaos of the motor pool like a shadow passing through a forest. Soldiers were running toward the gate, shouting orders that were being swallowed by the wind. No one looked at the specialist in the dirty ox moving toward the rack of Polaris MRZRs. She chose the one on the end, a stripped-down, sand-colored light infantry vehicle that smelled of hot rubber and old canvas. She didn't have the keys. She didn't need them. She reached under the dash, her fingers finding the specific bundle of wires that controlled the ignition bypass, a flaw she'd noted in the technical manual 3 months ago while she was supposed to be filing property loss reports. She didn't cut them. She simply touched 2 specific pins together with the edge of the notched challenge coin. The engine roared to life, a throaty, defiant growl that was immediately lost in the ambient noise of the base's sirens. Move over, a voice barked. Maya looked up. Chief Miller was standing by the roll cage, a M249 SAW slung over his shoulder and a look of grim, weary resignation on his face. He didn't look like a chief warrant officer anymore. He looked like the man who had spent 20 years in the dirt, waiting for a reason to stop caring about his pension. Chief, you stay here, you can claim you were trying to stop me, Maya said, her hand on the gear shift. I'm the only one with the gate codes for the south perimeter, Miller said, sliding into the passenger seat and slamming the door. And you drive like a property clerk. Move. Maya didn't argue. She slammed the MRZR into gear and floored it, the tires screaming as they caught traction on the gravel. They didn't head for the main gate where Holloway was. They headed for the South Sally Port, the back door used for trash detail and fuel bladders. It was guarded by a single, terrified private who looked like he was about to bolt. Miller leaned out the window, his voice a whip crack. Open the gate, son. We're on a pursuit vector for the drone controller, code Red Alpha 6. There was no such code as Red Alpha 6. But in the middle of a base-wide blackout and an aborted suicide attack, the private didn't check the manual. He hit the manual override. The chain-link gate groaned open, and Maya didn't wait for it to clear. She punched the MRZR through the gap, the metal scraping against the roll cage with a sound like a giant's teeth grinding together. Then they were out. The transition from the base to the open desert was like falling off a cliff. The hum of the servers and the safety of the walls vanished, replaced by the vast, oppressive silence of the Registan. The sun was a white-hot hammer, and the dust kicked up by their tires formed a localized storm that threatened to choke them. Maya drove by instinct, her eyes scanning the terrain not for landmarks, but for the noise of the environment. She could feel the tilt of the earth, the way the sand shifted under the weight of the vehicle, the specific frequency of the engine's vibration as it struggled with the heat. 4 miles to the base of the Gar, Miller shouted over the wind. The road is washed out. We'll have to go up the dry creek bed. We're not taking the road, Maya said. She took a sharp left, the MRZR tilting dangerously as she climbed the first of the rolling dunes. The enemy is watching the road. They're expecting a QRF, quick reaction force with Humvees. They're not expecting 2 people in a lawnmower. As they climbed, the world began to change. The SOS signal was closer now, but it was shifting. The 4-second pause was shortening. 1, 3, 1, 2. The countdown is accelerating, Maya muttered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The signal isn't a beacon anymore, it's a proximity trigger. A trigger for what? For the OP, they didn't just abandon that place, Chief, they mined it. If that signal hits 0, whatever is up there, whoever is up there, becomes a crater. And the burst from that explosion will carry a localized electromagnetic pulse. It'll fry everything within 5 miles, including Gambry's backup generators. They're going to finish what the worm started, Miller said, his voice cold. They're going to kill the power for good, and then they're going to walk into the base while we're all gasping for air in the dark. Maya didn't respond. She was focused on the climb. The MRZR groaned as it hit a 30-degree incline, the tires churning through the soft, fine silt. She could feel the engine's temperature rising. She could hear the micro-pitting of the pistons, the way the coolant was beginning to cavitate. She eased off the throttle, not because she wanted to slow down, but because she was listening to the machine's limits. She played the engine like an instrument, finding the narrow band of RPMs where the torque was maximum and the heat was manageable. They reached the base of the Garib Gar, a jagged spine of rock that looked like it had been broken by a frustrated god. The old Soviet post was a gray concrete tooth perched on a ledge 500 feet above them. The only way up was a narrow, winding goat path that had been partially reclaimed by the mountain. We go on foot from here, Maya said, killing the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, the heat of the desert settling over them like a shroud. Maya hopped out, checking her gear. She had 4 mags, 2 grenades, and her father's notched coin tucked into the webbing of her vest. She felt the weight of her equipment, the specific way the ceramic plates in her armor pressed against her collarbone, the way the water in her camelback sloshed with a low, rhythmic thud. It was the rhythm of her own survival. I'll take point, Miller said, checking his SAW. No, Maya said. I need you to stay with the vehicle. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, I need you to use the MRZR's radio to broadcast on the 420 megahertz band. I need you to play the Fibonacci sequence, the one I wrote on the dash. It'll buy the base another 10 minutes of logic clock. Thorne, I'm not letting you go up there alone. You have to, Maya said. She looked at him, and for a second she wasn't a specialist and he wasn't a chief. They were just 2 people at the edge of the world. You're the only one who can talk to the base if I don't make it. You have to be the voice, Chief. I'm just the signal. Miller looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, a short, sharp movement. 20 minutes, Thorne, then I start singing. Maya turned and began to climb. The path was a nightmare of loose shale and jagged limestone. Every step was a gamble, the ground wanting to slide away beneath her. She moved with a focused, rhythmic grace, her breath timed to her movements. Asterisk step. Breathe, grip, step. Asterisk she didn't look up at the OP. She looked at the rock 6 inches in front of her face. She looked at the small, precise details, the way the mica in the stone caught the sun, the specific texture of the dust. She was halfway up when the first shot rang out. The bullet struck the rock 3 inches from her left hand, spraying her with stinging shards of stone. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She dropped her center of gravity and rolled into a shallow depression behind a waist-high boulder, her M4 coming up in one fluid motion. The sound of the shot was a sharp, high-pitched asterisk crack asterisk that echoed through the canyon. Dragunov, 7, 62x 54 mm. The shooter was high, maybe at the 2 o'clock position relative to the OP. She waited. She didn't peek. She listened. She heard the bolt of the sniper rifle cycle. It was a dry, metallic sound, slightly delayed by the distance. Based on the acoustics, the shooter was 300 yards away, hidden in the shadows of a natural cave. She closed her eyes. She didn't need to see him. She could feel the rhythm of his fire. Most snipers had a cadence, a breath, a hold, a squeeze. This one was hurried. He was anxious. He was firing every 2 seconds. Asterisk 1, 2, 3, 4. Asterisk Maya moved. She didn't run away. She ran asterisk forward asterisk, crossing a 10-foot gap of open ground just as the next bullet hissed through the space she had occupied a second before. She hit the ground, slid behind a low ridge, and didn't stop. She was moving in the dead space of his reload cycle, a ghost in the gaps of his vision. She reached the base of the concrete observation post. The structure was a ruin, the walls pockmarked by decades of small arms fire, and the ceiling partially collapsed. The SOS signal was coming from inside, a low electronic chirp that felt like a needle pressing against her brain. She reached the door, a heavy steel slab that was hanging by a single hinge. She paused, her back against the hot concrete. The smell of the place was wrong. It didn't smell like an abandoned ruin. It smelled like high-voltage ozone and rotting meat. She transitioned her rifle to her left shoulder, peeking around the edge. The room was filled with shadows and the flickering blue light of a dozen portable server racks. They were jury-rigged, connected by a chaotic web of fiber-optic cables that looked like the nervous system of some digital beast. In the center of the room, slumped in a folding chair, was a man. He was wearing a tattered U.S. Army uniform, the name tape long since torn away. He was old, his skin the color of parchment, his eyes clouded with cataracts. He was holding a handheld transmitter, his thumb rhythmically pressing the button. Asterisk short, 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 long, 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 asterisk stop, Maya said, her voice a low command. The man didn't look up, he didn't even flinch. You're late, Maya, he whispered. The voice hit her like a physical blow. It was a voice from a dream, a voice that had been buried under 15 years of Ohio dirt. It was her father's voice, but hollowed out as if the man had been replaced by a recording. My father is dead, Maya said, her finger tightening on the trigger. He died in the mill, I saw the casket. They put a man in a box, the figure said, finally looking up. His face was a map of scars and radiation burns. But they didn't put the ghost in there. The agency needed a ghost, and you were always the best part of me, Maya, the only part that worked. You're a node, Maya said, her mind racing, her sight beginning to process the room. She saw the server racks weren't just processing data, they were a relay. You're the bridge for the worm, you're helping them kill the base. I'm saving it, he said, a horrific, rattling cough shaking his thin frame. Holloway and his kind. They're the past. They're the ones who will lead us into a war we can't win because they don't understand the rhythm. The enemy is already inside the walls, Maya. They've been there for years. The only way to win is to burn the house down and build it again, from the signal up. There is no building again after an EMP, Dad, Maya said, her voice trembling for the first time. There's just the dark and the people who will die in it. The timer is at 90 seconds, he said, nodding toward a small, glowing screen on the floor. The trigger is keyed to my heartbeat if I stop pressing this button or if my heart stops. The surge initiates. You can't shoot me, Maya. You can't even touch me. Maya looked at the screen. Asterisk 0124. Asterisk the room was getting hotter. The servers were whining, their cooling fans struggling against the dust. Maya looked at the cables. She didn't see wires. She saw the flow of information. She saw the weight of the data. I don't have to shoot you, Maya said. She lowered her rifle. She walked toward the server racks. Stay back, he screamed, his thumb frantic on the button. If you break the circuit, it triggers. Maya didn't listen. She was looking at the main relay, a black box with a series of high-gain antennas. It was the heart of the Hinterland ghost. It was the device that was translating his heartbeat into the kill code. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the challenge coin. "You taught me that every machine has a tolerance," Maya said. Her voice was calm now, the dark competence taking over, a cold, crystalline layer of logic settling over her grief. "You taught me that if you find the frequency of the metal, you can make it shatter without ever hitting it." "Maya, don't." She didn't hit the box. She didn't cut the wires. She took the challenge coin and began to scrape it against the aluminum housing of the relay. It was a horrible screeching sound, like a fingernail on a chalkboard. But she wasn't doing it randomly. She was scraping in a specific accelerating rhythm. Asterisk ZZT, 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 ZZT. Asterisk, she was creating a harmonic vibration. The aluminum began to hum. The servers began to stutter. The blue lights on the racks flickered, turning a sickly, jaundiced yellow. "What are you doing?" The man gasped, his hand shaking. "I'm changing the handshake," Maya said. "I'm giving the worm a new heart." The vibrations were traveling through the floor now. Maya could feel it in her teeth. She could feel the rhythm of the relay box beginning to lose its coherence. She was injecting noise into the system, the kind of noise the worm couldn't predict because it was physical, not digital. It was the sound of Youngstown steel. It was the sound of a daughter's rage. Asterisk 0045. Asterisk asterisk 0044. Asterisk, the man in the chair slumped forward, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. It's too fast. I can't keep up." "Let go, Dad," Maya said, her hands moving with a blur of speed as she wedged the coin into the cooling vent of the relay, forcing the fan to stop. The motor began to whine, a high-pitched scream of protest. "Let go of the button." "They'll kill you," he whispered. "The ones who sent me. They're already on the mountainside." "Let them come," Maya said. She grabbed the relay box and ripped it from the floor. A shower of sparks blinded her for a split second. The smell of burning insulation filled her nose. The timer on the floor froze at asterisk 0012 asterisk. The man in the chair let out a long, final sigh. His thumb slipped from the button. His head fell to his chest, the ghost finally leaving the machine. Maya stood in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. She was shaking, her hands covered in soot and blood where the sharp edges of the relay had cut her. She looked at the man who claimed to be her father. He was gone. Whether he was a ghost, a traitor, or a victim, he was just a piece of meat now, another casualty of a war that had no front lines. She didn't have time to mourn. Outside, she heard the sound of a heavy engine, not the MRZR. A technical, a Toyota Hilux with a DSHK heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. She ran to the window. Two vehicles were screaming up the goat path, their tires kicking up a massive wall of dust. They weren't army. They were wearing the same civilian contractor vests she'd seen in the motor pool. The secondary bypass wasn't a computer program, it was a ground assault. "Chief," she screamed into her radio. "Chief, do you copy?" Static. The relay's death had jammed the localized frequencies. Maya looked at the room. She looked at the dead man. She looked at her rifle. She was alone on a mountain with a dead ghost and 20 armed men coming to finish the job. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She went to the server racks and began to rip the fiber optic cables from their sockets. She wasn't destroying them, she was braiding them. She was making a trap. She moved with a frantic, silent efficiency. She used the cables to tripwire the entrance. She used the remaining battery packs from the servers to create a series of localized arc flashes, makeshift grenades that would blind anyone entering the room. She was a Thorne. She didn't need a platoon. She needed a rhythm. The first vehicle reached the ledge. She heard the doors slam. She heard the shouts in a language she didn't know, mixed with the flat, professional English of mercenaries. "Secure the relay," a voice shouted, "and kill whoever is inside." Maya dropped to her stomach behind the fallen concrete of the ceiling. She leveled her rifle at the door. The first man through the door didn't even see the cable. He hit it at full tilt, his feet flying out from under him. As he fell, he triggered the first battery pack. A blinding white flash filled the room, followed by the smell of ozone and the sound of a man screaming as his retinas were seared. Maya fired. Asterisk pop pop. Asterisk, the man went still. "Contact," someone yelled outside. "Grenade!" A fragment of a M67 grenade bounced through the door. Maya curled into a ball, pressing her back against the thickest part of the concrete. The explosion was a physical weight that slammed into her, knocking the air from her lungs. Dust and debris rained down on her, the heat of the blast singeing the hair on the back of her neck. Her ears were ringing, a high-pitched whine that threatened to drown out the world. But through the ringing, she heard the footsteps. 3 men, moving in a tactical stack. They were professionals, they didn't rush. They moved with a slow, deliberate cadence. Asterisk step. Pause. Step. Asterisk Maya didn't wait for them to clear the door. She stood up, her rifle braced against her shoulder, and began to fire through the thin plywood of the interior wall. She wasn't aiming at the door, she was aiming at where their bodies would be based on the rhythm of their steps. She heard a grunt, a heavy thud, and then the frantic, blind return fire that shredded the plywood into toothpicks. Maya dropped again, crawling through the dust. She reached the second tripwire. "She's in the back!" a voice yelled. A man burst through the door, his rifle leveled. He was big, a bearded contractor with a jagged scar across his throat. He saw Maya, and for a split second their eyes met. He saw a small, dirty woman on the floor. He didn't see the cable. He stepped on it, and the second battery pack didn't flash. It hummed. Maya had wired it to the server's high-voltage capacitor. The man's body jerked as the current hit him, his muscles locking in a horrific, silent spasm. He fell forward, his rifle firing a wild burst into the ceiling. Maya was up, moving past him. She didn't look at his face. She ran for the window. The ledge was a 30-foot drop. She looked back. The last three men were entering the room, their faces covered in tactical masks, their movements precise. They weren't shouting anymore. They were hunters. Maya didn't have a choice. She jumped. The fall felt like it lasted a lifetime. She hit the slope of the shale, the impact jarring her teeth, her rifle flying from her hand. She tumbled, the sharp rocks tearing at her ox, her skin, her dignity. She felt a rib snap, a sharp, white-hot flash of pain that stole her breath. She stopped rolling 50 feet down the slope, her body wedged against a stunted juniper tree. She lay there for a moment, the world spinning, the sky a dizzying whirl of blue and white. Her mouth was filled with the taste of copper. Her left arm was numb. She heard the shouts from above. They were looking down. "There she is! Kill her!" The DSHK in the truck bed opened up. The heavy, 50 caliber rounds tore into the rock around her, each impact like a small explosion. Dust and stone chips filled the air, a lethal hail that threatened to shred her. Maya dragged herself behind the trunk of the juniper. It wasn't enough cover. The heavy rounds were chewing through the wood like a saw. She looked for her rifle. It was 20 feet away, perched precariously on a ledge. She couldn't reach it. She looked at her hand. She was still clutching the challenge coin. She felt a surge of rage, not at the men shooting at her, not at the ghost in the room, but at the world that thought it could break her. She was Maya Thorne. She was the girl who fixed the unfixable. She was the one who heard the heartbeat of the world. She reached into her vest and pulled out her last grenade. It wasn't a frag, it was a smoke. She popped the pin and threw it, not toward the trucks, but toward the base of the juniper. A thick, oily cloud of white smoke erupted, obscuring her in seconds. The DSHK fire didn't stop, but it became aimless, the rounds thudding into the hillside in a blind, rhythmic pattern. Maya moved. She didn't run down. She climbed asterisk up asterisk. She moved through the smoke, her fingers digging into the shale, ignoring the agony in her ribs. She was a shadow in the white. She reached the ledge where the first truck was parked, the engine still idling with a low, rhythmic thrum. The driver was leaning out the window, shouting to the gunner in the back. Maya didn't use a gun. She reached the rear wheel of the truck. She took the challenge coin and jammed it into the valve stem of the tire, snapping it off. The air hissed out with a high-pitched scream. The truck tilted. "What the hell?" the driver shouted. Maya didn't wait. She grabbed the edge of the truck bed and pulled herself up, her movements a blur of desperate, pained speed. The gunner was focused on the smoke below, his back to her. She didn't shoot him. She grabbed the barrel of the DSHK. The metal was searingly hot, burning through her gloves, and yanked it upward. The gunner spun around, his eyes wide with shock. Maya slammed her forehead into his nose, the click of the bone breaking a satisfying, rhythmic end to the moment. As he fell, she grabbed the spade grips of the heavy machine gun. She didn't aim at the men. She aimed at the second truck. The DSHK roared, the recoil nearly tearing her arms from her sockets. It was a different kind of rhythm, a slow, heavy asterisk thump-thump-thump asterisk that felt like a giant's heartbeat. The rounds tore through the second hillocks, hitting the fuel tank. The explosion was magnificent. A fireball erupted, engulfing the second truck and the three men standing near it. The force of the blast knocked Maya backward, her head hitting the cab of the truck. The world went gray. She heard a voice. It was far away, distorted by the ringing in her ears. "Thorne, Thorne, get down!" She felt a hand on her collar, dragging her from the truck. She hit the ground hard, her vision flickering. Chief Miller was there. He was holding a M4, his face a mask of grim determination. Behind him, the MRZR was idling, its engine a steady, reassuring hum. "I told you 20 minutes, Miller shouted, firing a burst at the remaining contractors who were scrambled in the rocks. "You're 3 minutes over, Specialist. The relay is gone," Maya gasped, her voice a wet rattle. "I know, the base just came back online. I heard the CRAM's radar spin up from 2 miles away." Miller hoisted her into the passenger seat of the MRZR. He didn't look back at the burning trucks or the ruin of the OP. He slammed it into gear and tore down the hillside, the little vehicle leaping over the rocks like a mountain goat. Maya leaned her head back against the roll cage. The wind was cool against her face, the dust beginning to settle. She looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, a bruised purple and orange wash that made the desert look like a dream. They reached the south gate of FOB Gambry 10 minutes later. The gate didn't groan open this time. It was already open. And standing in the center of the road, surrounded by a full platoon of MPs and a line of Humvees, was Colonel Holloway. Miller brought the MRZR to a halt 20 feet from the colonel. The silence that followed was different from the silence of the mountain. This was the silence of a reckoning. Holloway walked forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked at the smoking wreck of the MRZR. He looked at the soot-covered, bleeding Chief Miller. And finally, his gaze settled on Maya Thorne. Maya didn't move. She didn't try to stand. She sat in the seat, her arm cradled against her chest, her face a mask of dirt and dried blood. "Specialist Thorne," Holloway said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Sir," Maya said, "you are under arrest for desertion, theft of military property, and assault on a superior officer," Holloway said. Maya didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket with her good hand and pulled out the challenge coin. It was blackened, bent, and covered in her father's blood. She held it out. "The relay was at OP Whiskey 7, sir," she said, her voice steady. "The worm was a diversion. The real attack was a kinetic cyber hybrid. The evidence is on the mountain." Holloway didn't take the coin. He looked at it as if it were a poisonous insect. "The S2 shop has already confirmed the signal from the mountain," Holloway said. "And the drone relay you shot down. We found the wreckage. It was proprietary KBR tech." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You were right, Specialist, about all of it." "Thank you, sir," Maya said. "It doesn't matter," Holloway said, and for the first time Maya saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of the enemy, but fear of the truth. "You broke the chain of command. You acted outside the system. If I let this stand, if I acknowledge what you did, the system fails, and the system is all we have." He turned to the MPs. "Take her to the brig, secure the chief in his quarters. I want a full blackout on this incident. As far as the Pentagon is concerned, the attack was repelled by the base's automated systems. Specialist Thorne was injured during a technical malfunction in the motor pool." "Sir," Miller said, his voice rising, "you can't do this. She saved this base. She saved you asterisk." "I am saving the Army, Chief," Holloway said without looking back. "Move them." The MPs moved in. They were gentle, but they were firm. They lifted Maya from the seat. As they led her away, Maya looked back at the mountain. The beacon was gone. The ghost was silent. She felt a strange, cold peace. She had lost her career. She had lost her father again. She had lost the only place she had felt she belonged. But as the heavy steel door of the brig slammed shut, the sound of final, rhythmic asterisk thud asterisk, Maya Thorne closed her eyes. In the darkness of the cell, she didn't hear the sirens or the shouting. She heard the bass. She heard the steady, healthy hum of the servers. She heard the rhythmic breathing of the soldiers in the barracks. She heard the pulse of the world restored. She had paid the cost, and she would pay it again. She reached into her palm, feeling the phantom weight of the coin. She was a Thorne, and the rhythm always continued. Outside, in the fading light of the desert, a single small radio in a forgotten corner of the motor pool began to static. Asterisk short, short, short. Asterisk the SOS was gone, but a new signal was beginning. Asterisk long, long, long. Asterisk the acknowledgement. Maya Thorne heard it through the concrete walls. She smiled, a tiny, bloody movement of her lips. The reckoning was coming. But for now, she was the only one who knew the song. The air in the detention cell at FOB Gambry didn't circulate so much as it vibrated. A low-frequency hum generated by the massive industrial HVAC units struggling against the Afghan heat outside the reinforced concrete walls. Maya Thorne sat on the edge of the narrow steel cot, her spine perfectly straight despite the 3 cracked ribs that screamed every time she drew a breath. The cell was 4 paces wide and 6 paces long. A sterile box of cinder blocks painted a shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to absorb hope. There was no window, only a heavy steel door with a sliding meal slot and a small, reinforced observation port. The light was a flickering fluorescent tube overhead that hummed in B-flat, A tone she knew was 3 hertz off the standard frequency for the base's power grid. It was a small detail, a tiny symptom of the larger rot she had tried to stop, and it gnawed at her more than the prospect of a court-martial. She was wearing a clean set of hospital scrubs, the coarse blue fabric a jarring contrast to the sand-caked ops they had cut off her in the medical tent. Her hands were clean, the grease and soot scrubbed away by a silent corpseman, but the skin beneath her fingernails was still stained with the copper-scented residue of the mountain. She looked at her palms, seeing the faint, angry red outlines where the heat of the DSHK-TKS barrel had melted the outer layer of her tactical gloves. The pain was distant, a secondary data point in the larger calculation of her survival. She was processing the silence. On the mountain, the silence had been heavy and laden with ghosts. Here, the silence was sharp and clinical, the silence of a system deciding how to erase a person who had become an inconvenience. The heavy slide of the observation port clicked open. A pair of eyes, obscured by the glare of the hallway lights, peered in for a 5-second count before the slot slammed shut again. It was the 4th time in 2 hours. They were checking for signs of a breakdown. They wanted her to be pacing or weeping or screaming at the walls. They wanted her to be the unstable female soldier the official narrative was already beginning to construct. Maya gave them nothing. She remained a statue, her gaze fixed on the door, her breathing timed to the rhythmic pulse of the HVAC. She was counting the seconds between the guards' rounds, mapping the heartbeat of her own imprisonment. She knew exactly what was happening in the command center a half-mile away. She could see it as clearly as if she were standing in the room. Colonel Holloway would be sitting at the head of the conference table, his uniform crisp, his face a mask of weary, professional concern. Around him would be the staff officers, the S2 intelligence captain, the S3 operations major, the JAG lawyer with a briefcase full of non-disclosure agreements. They would be looking at the wreckage of the MRZR and the charred remains of the OP on Whiskey 7. They would be looking at the digital footprints she had left behind in the server logs, the unauthorized overrides, the hijacked CRAM protocols, the stolen vehicle. They weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a way to preserve the institution. In the American military, the chain of command was more than a structure. It was a religion. To acknowledge that a specialist, a clerk no less, had seen a threat the entire intelligence apparatus had missed and had then gone over the wire to solve it with a disgraced chief warrant officer was to admit that the religion was a lie. If Maya was right, Holloway was negligent. If Maya was a hero, the system was a failure. Therefore, Maya could not be a hero. She had to be a casualty of her own delusions. The door groaned, the heavy mechanical locks disengaging with a series of metallic clacks that echoed like gunfire in the small space. It opened to reveal Captain Sarah Vance, the base's JAG officer. Vance was 34, a Yale law graduate who wore her rank like a shield, her expression carefully neutral. She carried a digital tablet and a manila folder, the weight of the institution tucked under her arm. Behind her stood 2 MPs, their faces set in the grim, blank stares of men doing a job they didn't particularly like. "Specialist Thorne," Vance said, her voice echoing off the concrete. "Stand up." Maya stood, the movement sending a jagged spike of white-hot pain through her side. She didn't flinch. She stood at attention, her eyes level, her shoulders square. "Captain," Maya said. Vance stepped into the cell, signaling for the MPs to remain in the doorway. She looked at Maya for a long moment, her eyes scanning the bruises on Maya's face and the way she favored her right side. There was no pity in the gaze, only a sharp, analytical curiosity. Vance had spent her career dealing with the aftermath of incidents, but she had never seen a soldier look quite like this after 3 days in solitary. "You've been processed through medical," Vance said, opening the folder. "The report says you have 3 cracked ribs, a grade 2 concussion, and 2nd-degree burns on your hands. It also says you refused any pain medication stronger than ibuprofen." "I need to keep my head clear, ma'am," Maya said. "Clear for what?" Vance asked, her tone sharpening. "The investigation is already concluded, Thorne. Colonel Holloway has signed off on the preliminary findings. You are being charged under the UCMJ with Article 85, desertion, Article 108, destruction of military property, and Article 121, larceny of a government vehicle. There is also a pending charge for the unauthorized discharge of a weapons system within a restricted zone." Maya didn't blink. "And the signal from Whiskey 7, ma'am?" "The KBR tech in the drone wreckage. The digital handshake at the server racks. Vance's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle tightening of the skin around her eyes. The official record indicates that the signal was a localized atmospheric interference caused by a solar flare. The drone wreckage was recovered by a private security detail before our investigators could arrive on site. As for the server racks, the fire at the OP destroyed any evidence of a digital relay. According to the S2 report, you suffered a psychological break brought on by combat stress and a family history of mental instability, leading you to believe in a conspiracy that simply does not exist. Maya felt the air in the room grow cold. It was the family history comment that did it. They had dug into her father's records. They had found the redacted files, the accidental death in Youngstown, the whispers of a man who knew too much about the things that lived in the wires. They were using her father's ghost to bury her alive. "My father wasn't unstable, Captain," Maya said, her voice a low, dangerous vibration. "He was a ghost, and the men who sent him to that mountain are the same men who told Holloway to sign that report." "Careful, specialist," Vance said, leaning in. "You're digging a hole you won't be able to climb out of. The colonel is offering you a deal, an other than honorable discharge. You sign a confession admitting to a mental health crisis, you agree to a permanent gag order regarding the events at Gambury, and you walk away. No prison time, no court-martial. You go home to Ohio and you forget you ever wore this uniform." "And what happens to Chief Miller?" Meyer asked. Vance hesitated. The silence lasted a fraction of a second too long. "Chief Warrant Officer Miller is being forcibly retired. His pension is being reviewed for administrative discrepancies. If you take the deal, the review goes away. If you don't, he goes to Leavenworth as your accomplice." Maya looked at the JAG officer, and for the first time she saw the rhythm of the conversation. Vance wasn't here to prosecute her. She was here to hide her. The institution was terrified. They weren't just protecting Holloway's career, they were protecting something much larger. The KBR tech she had mentioned, the private contractor involvement, was the thread that, if pulled, would unravel a multi-billion-dollar tapestry of corruption and shadow governance that spanned 3 continents. "The chief didn't do anything but follow a lead," Maya said. "The chief stole a vehicle and engaged in unauthorized combat," Vance countered. "The system doesn't care about your leads, Thorne. It cares about the rules. And you broke all of them." "I saved the base," Maya said, her voice flat. "If I hadn't gone up that mountain, the logic gates on the munitions storage would have been overridden. Gambury would be a crater right now, and you wouldn't be standing here talking about deals. You'd be a smudge on the desert floor." Vance closed the folder with a sharp */slap*. "Nobody believes that, Thorne, because nobody is allowed to believe it. You have 24 hours to sign the papers. After that, the transport arrives to take you to Bagram for the hearing. Think about your father. Think about what happened to him when he tried to be a hero in the dark. Don't make his mistakes." Vance turned and walked out, the MPs trailing behind her. The door slammed shut, the heavy locks cycling back into place. Maya was alone again in the beige box. She sat back down on the cot, the pain in her ribs a steady, rhythmic throb. She didn't think about the deal. She didn't think about the OTH discharge. She thought about the doctor who had treated her in the medical tent, the way he had looked at her burns, the way his hands had trembled as he realized they weren't just flash burns, but high-voltage contact injuries consistent with a specific type of electrical relay. He had known. He had seen the truth, and he had looked away. The institution wasn't just the officers, it was everyone. It was the silence of the people who knew better. It was the fear of losing a pension, a rank, a comfortable life. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to the mountain. She could still feel the vibration of the challenge coin against the aluminum housing of the relay. She could still hear her father's voice, the hollowed-out, broken sound of it. "You were always the best part of me, Maya. The only part that worked." The ghost wasn't just a nickname, it was a role. Her father had been a signal intelligence specialist for a black unit that didn't exist on any organizational chart. He had been sent to that mountain not to save the base, but to facilitate the very attack she had stopped. He had been part of the rot, and she had killed him. Whether he was already dead or not, she was the one who had ended the signal. The cost of her loyalty to the mission wasn't just her career. It was the final, agonizing realization that her father had died a traitor, or a victim of a system that used men like him until they were broken, then left them in ruins to be found by their daughters. A few hours later, the meal slot slid open. A tray was pushed through, lukewarm Salisbury steak, a scoop of gray mashed potatoes, and a plastic cup of water. Taped to the bottom of the water cup was a small handwritten note. Asterisk Hangar 4, 0300. The pulse is still there. Asterisk, there was no signature, but Maya didn't need one. She knew the handwriting. It was Miller. She ate the food, forcing herself to chew each bite, focusing on the mechanical act of fueling her body. She needed the calories. She needed the strength. At 0200, she began her exercises, slow, controlled movements that tested the limits of her ribs. She breathed through the pain, using the rhythm to isolate the agony, pushing it into a corner of her mind where it couldn't interfere with her motor functions. She was a Thorne. She was a machine made of Youngstown steel and military discipline. At 0255, the light in her cell flickered. It wasn't the usual hum. It was a sequence. Asterisk dot dot dash. Asterisk, the power grid for the detention block was being cycled. Someone was messing with the logic gates of the building's security system. A second later, the heavy mechanical lock on her door clicked. Not the sound of a key, but the sound of an electronic override. Maya stood, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pushed the door. It swung open an inch. The hallway was dark, the emergency red lights casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. The MP station at the end of the corridor was empty, a half-eaten donut and a cold cup of coffee sitting on the desk. The monitors were all displaying static, the same solar flare interference they had used to dismiss her report. She moved like a shadow, her bare feet silent on the cold linoleum. She didn't head for the main exit. She knew the base's layout, the service tunnels, the HVAC shafts, the places where the blood of the base flowed. She found the maintenance hatch behind the laundry room, a heavy steel plate she had noticed months ago while she was doing property loss reports. She used the edge of a stolen spoon to trip the manual release, slipping into the narrow, dark crawlspace. The air here was thick with the smell of dust and old grease. She crawled for what felt like miles, her ribs screaming, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She emerged in the shadow of Hangar 7, the massive structure where the base's transport aircraft were serviced. The flight line was a hive of activity even at this hour, with fuel trucks and maintenance crews moving under the glare of the floodlights. She saw him near the perimeter fence, standing in the shadow of a C-130 Hercules. Chief Miller looked older, his face etched with new lines of exhaustion. He was wearing a civilian flight suit, his rank tabs gone, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had finally found him. Beside him was a small, dusty duffel bag. "You're late," Miller whispered as she approached. "I had to take the scenic route," Maya said, her voice a rasp. Miller looked at her, his eyes softening for a fleeting second. He reached out, his hand hovering over her shoulder before he pulled it back. "The transport for Bagram is on the tarmac, but there's another bird leaving in 10 minutes, a private contractor flight heading for Qatar. The manifest is flexible." "You did this?" Meyer asked. "I didn't do anything," Miller said, looking away toward the floodlights. "A friend of mine in ops, someone who remembers what it was like before Holloway took over." He looked the other way for 5 minutes. "It's all we get, Thorne." "Why, Chief? You could have taken the retirement. You could have walked away." Miller looked back at her, and the fire she had seen on the roof was back, colder and deeper now. "I've spent 20 years being the voice of the system, Maya. I've told young soldiers to trust the gear, trust the plan, trust the officers. And then I watched you go up that mountain and do what I didn't have the guts to do. If I let them bury you, then everything I've done for 20 years is a lie. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it so I can look in the mirror tomorrow morning." He handed her the duffel bag. "There's a passport in there, a clean ID, some cash, and a drive. It's a copy of the server logs from the OP. I pulled them before the fire started." Maya took the bag, the weight of it a physical promise. "What about you?" "I'm staying," Miller said. "Someone has to be here to tell the CID investigators that you overpowered the guards and escaped on your own. I'm an old man, Thorne. They'll slap my wrist and take my pension, and I'll spend the rest of my life fishing in Montana. But you have the signal. You're the only one who can find out who sent that ghost to the mountain." Maya looked at the C-130, its engines beginning to whine as they prepared for takeoff. The sound was a low, rhythmic roar that felt like a summons. She looked back at the base, the walls, the lights, the soldiers who would never know her name. She felt a profound, aching sense of loss. She had loved this life. She had loved the order, the clarity, the sense of being part of something larger than herself. "They'll come after you," Maya said. "Let them come," Miller said, a grim smile touching his lips. "I'm a chief warrant officer. I've been hiding from the army while being in it for decades. I'll be fine. You just keep moving. Don't stop until you find the source of that handshake." Maya stepped forward and hugged him, a brief, fierce contact that cost them both. Then she turned and ran toward the aircraft, her silhouette a dark blur against the orange glow of the tarmac. She reached the rear ramp of the C-130 just as it began to lift. She scrambled inside, pulling herself into the cavernous, dimly lit cargo hold. The plane was filled with crates of equipment and a few tired-looking contractors who didn't even look up as she climbed in. She found a corner behind a stack of ration boxes and slumped against the vibrating metal wall. The engines roared to life, the plane beginning its long, lumbering taxi toward the runway. As the wheels left the ground, Maya felt the shift in the rhythm. The base was gone. The desert was gone. She was in the air, a ghost moving through the dark. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the drive Miller had given her. It was a small, silver thumb drive, unremarkable and cold. But as she held it, she realized something. The vibration of the plane, the four massive turboprop engines, was creating a specific harmonic in the cargo hold. It was a frequency she recognized. Asterisk short, short, short. Asterisk. She froze. She looked at the drive. It wasn't coming from the engines. It was coming from the drive itself. It was a beacon. Miller hadn't just given her the evidence. He had given her the bait. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Miller hadn't betrayed her. He was protecting her by giving the people chasing her a target they couldn't ignore. He was the one who was going to be the noise while she became the signal. She looked out the small porthole as the plane climbed over the Garib Gar Mountains. Below them, the ruins of OP Whiskey 7 were a dark smudge against the moonlight. And there, near the ledge where she had fought for her life, she saw a single flickering light. It wasn't a fire. It was a signal lamp, asterisk long, 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 asterisk the acknowledgement. Maya Thorne leaned her head against the vibrating wall of the plane. She was a deserter. She was a fugitive. She was a woman with nothing left but a drive and a broken body. But as the plane turned toward the west, she felt a new rhythm starting inside her. It wasn't the rhythm of the base or the rhythm of the mountain. It was the rhythm of a hunter. She closed her eyes, the sound of the engines becoming a lullaby. She would find them. She would find the men who had turned her father into a ghost and her life into a lie. The reckoning wasn't over. It was just changing frequencies. The plane leveled out at 30,000 feet. The contractors slept. The cargo remained silent. And in the corner of the hold, Specialist Maya Thorne sat in the dark, her hand clenched around a silver drive, her heart beating in a steady, perfect cadence. She was the signal now, and the world was finally starting to listen. Back at FOB Gambury, Colonel Holloway stood on the balcony of his office, his eyes fixed on the lights of the C-130 as they vanished into the stars. He held a glass of scotch in his hand, the ice rattling against the crystal. Behind him, the door opened, and a man in a civilian suit, no tie, no name tag, just an aura of quiet, expensive authority, stepped into the room. "She's gone?" the man asked. "She escaped," Holloway said, his voice flat. "The chief facilitated it. We're processing him now. And the drive? She has it, just like you wanted." The man in the suit nodded, a thin, cold smile touching his lips. "Good. The ghost was always more effective when he had a reason to run. Let's see if the daughter is as resilient as the father." Holloway turned, his face a mask of sudden, sharp revulsion. "She saved this base, you son of a bitch. She's a better soldier than any of us." "That's exactly why she's so valuable, Colonel," the man said, turning to leave. "The best tools are the ones that think they are fighting for something. Keep the report clean. We'll take it from here." The door closed, leaving Holloway alone in the dark. He looked at the scotch, then threw the glass against the wall. The sound of it shattering was the only response the room gave him. The system had won. The institution was safe. And 1,000 miles away, the signal continued to pulse, a heartbeat in the dark, waiting for the girl from Youngstown to find the source. Maya Thorne didn't sleep. She watched the clouds through the porthole, her mind already mapping the next steps. She had the drive, she had the ID, and she had the one thing they hadn't counted on. She knew the rhythm of the enemy, because it was the same rhythm as her own. The C-130 banked toward Qatar, and the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon. A thin, pale line of hope in a world made of shadows. Maya Thorne took a breath, the pain in her ribs a reminder that she was still alive. The mission had changed, but the goal was the same. Silence, and then the truth. The story of Maya Thorne was no longer about a base or a mountain. It was about the things that lived in the wires and the girl who was brave enough to pull them out into the light. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 days, she let herself feel the weight of it all. The grief, the rage, the hope. It was a lot, but she could handle it. She was a Thorne, and she was just getting started. The air in the cargo hold shifted as the plane began its descent. Maya Thorne stood up, her movements fluid and precise. She adjusted the strap of the duffel bag, her face a mask of calm, controlled determination. She was ready. The ramp lowered as the plane touched down in the desert heat of Qatar. Maya Thorne stepped out into the light, her eyes scanning the horizon, her ears tuned to the hum of the world. The signal was waiting, and she was the only one who could answer it. She walked toward the terminal, a ghost among ghosts, her heart beating in a steady, rhythmic pulse. Asterisk short, 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 asterisk asterisk long, 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 asterisk. The handshake was complete. The game had begun. Maya Thorne disappeared into the crowd, her silhouette swallowed by the heat shimmer of the tarmac. The world didn't notice, the system didn't flinch. But somewhere in a room filled with servers and shadows, a light began to blink. Asterisk acknowledgement received. Asterisk the reckoning had arrived, and it was wearing a blue hospital scrub and a stolen ID. Maya Thorne was gone, but the ghost was just beginning to speak. The institution had tried to bury her. They had tried to erase her. They had tried to make her part of the silence. They had failed, because you can't kill a signal. You can only change its frequency, and Maya Thorne had found the frequency of the truth. She walked into the terminal, her head held high, her eyes fixed on the future. The past was behind her. The mountain was a memory. The future was a signal, and she was going to follow it to the end. The screen of the digital terminal in the airport flickered for a split second as she passed. A tiny, localized glitch that no one noticed. Asterisk Hinterland ghost active. Asterisk Maya Thorne smiled. She was the signal, and the world was finally going to hear the song. The weight of the institution, the betrayal of her father, the cold walls of the brig, all of it felt distant now, like a frequency fading into static. As Maya walked through the crowded terminal in Doha, she didn't see the travelers or the luxury shops or the polished marble floors. She saw the network. She saw the flow of data in the screens, the invisible pulses of the security cameras, the rhythmic dance of the flight schedules. She was moving through a digital forest, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't just a part of the machine. She was the one who knew where the gears were hidden. She found a quiet corner in a coffee shop, tucked away from the main thoroughfares. She sat with her back to a pillar, her eyes constantly scanning the room, the controlled mask firmly back in place, but with a new, sharper edge. She pulled out the drive Miller had given her. It felt heavy in her palm, a piece of lead that contained a lethal secret. She looked at her reflection in the darkened screen of a nearby display. She looked like a ghost. Her skin was pale beneath the desert tan, her eyes sunken but bright with a terrifying clarity. She was a woman who had lost everything and gained the only thing that mattered, the ability to see the world as it really was. A man in a tan suit sat 2 tables away. He was reading a newspaper, his movements too deliberate, his focus too fixed. He was Army CID, or agency, or one of the private contractors who had tried to kill her on the mountain. He was the first of many. They weren't going to let her walk away. They were going to follow the beacon until they could corner her and finish what Holloway had started. Maya didn't panic. She didn't even look at him directly. She simply took a sip of her water and let the rhythm of the airport settle into her bones. She began to count. Asterisk 1, 2, 3, 4. Asterisk the man shifted his weight. Asterisk 5, 6, 7, 8. Asterisk he looked at his watch. He was waiting for a signal. A go code from someone outside. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a small, portable tablet she had borrowed from the C-130's maintenance kit. She didn't turn it on. She didn't need to. She just held it, her fingers brushing the casing, feeling the faint vibration of the airport's public Wi-Fi. She knew how to bridge the gap. She knew how to inject the noise. She began to tap her fingers against the table in a specific, accelerating rhythm. Asterisk ZZT. ZZT, ZZT, ZZT. Asterisk the same rhythm she had used on the mountain. The Youngstown steel rhythm. The man in the tan suit froze. He heard it, not with his ears, but with the transmitter tucked into his ear canal. The frequency was overriding his comms, a jagged, screeching burst of interference that made him wince and reach for his ear. In that split second, Maya stood up. She didn't run. She walked with a steady, purposeful gait toward the transit area. She didn't look back to see if he was following. She knew he was. But she also knew that the interference would last exactly 42 seconds, the time it took for the airport's security routers to reset their logic gates after a localized surge. She had 42 seconds to become a ghost. She entered a crowded elevator, her body blending into the mass of travelers. She got off on the third floor, moved through a maintenance corridor, and emerged in the International Terminal's cargo bypass. The man in the tan suit was gone. The beacon on the drive was still pulsing, but she had wrapped it in a layer of conductive foil she'd stripped from a candy wrapper. The signal was muffled, a faint, dying echo that would lead them in circles through the terminal's maze of corridors. She reached the boarding gate for a flight to Frankfurt. She didn't have a ticket, she didn't need one. She had the ID Miller had given her, a high-level diplomatic courier pass that bypassed the standard biometric checks. As she handed the pass to the gate agent, she felt a sudden, sharp pang of guilt. Miller. He was still back at Gambury, facing the reckoning she had escaped. He was the one who was truly paying the cost. He was the one who had stayed in the system so she could be the one to break it. The agent smiled and handed the pass back. "Have a safe flight, Miss Vance." Vance. The name on the pass was Sarah Vance. Miller had used the JAG officer's credentials to build the cover. It was a final, brilliant move, a way to tie the institution's own hands. If they arrested her now, they would have to admit that their own legal counsel's identity had been compromised. They would have to acknowledge the rot inside the system. Maya stepped onto the plane, the cool air of the cabin a welcome relief after the heat of the tarmac. She found her seat in the back, the small of the plane's vibration a steady, reassuring hum. She leaned her head against the window and watched the lights of Doha fade into the distance. She was moving toward the heart of the machine, Frankfurt, the central hub for the contractor's logistics and the digital backbone of the hinterland ghost. She wasn't running away anymore. She was moving toward the source. The resolution of her story wasn't going to be a medal or a court-martial. It was going to be a choice between the system that had raised her and the truth that had set her free. And as the plane climbed into the dark, Maya Thorne felt the weight of that choice settling over her like a shroud. She was a soldier without a country, a daughter without a father, a woman without a name, but she was also the signal, and the signal was getting stronger. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the flight take over. Asterisk step. Breathe. Grip. Step. Asterisk the mountain was behind her. The mountain was inside her, and the reckoning was just beginning. In the command center at Gambury, Colonel Holloway stood before the large monitor that displayed the base's security grid. The screen was a patchwork of green and red, a digital map of his own failure. "The specialist is gone, sir," the S2 captain said, his voice trembling. "The beacon in Doha, it went dark 10 minutes ago." Holloway didn't turn around. He just stared at the screen, his reflection a ghost against the pixels. "She didn't escape, Captain," Holloway said, his voice a low, hollow rasp. "She was released by the very thing she tried to stop." He looked at the blackened challenge coin sitting on his desk. He picked it up, feeling the sharp, jagged edges of the metal. "We thought we were the ones in control," Holloway whispered. "But the rhythm belongs to her now." He dropped the coin into the trash can and walked out of the room, his boots heavy on the floor. He didn't look at the staff officers. He didn't look at the monitors. He just walked toward his quarters, a man who had finally realized that the system he had spent his life protecting was nothing more than a ghost in a machine he didn't understand. The silence that followed his departure was absolute, and in the dark, in a forgotten corner of the server room, a single blue light began to blink. Asterisk short, short, short. Asterisk the signal was still there, and Maya Thorne was the only one who knew how to turn it off. The plane to Frankfurt cruised through the night, a silver needle in the dark. In the back, specialist Maya Thorne slept, a deep, dreamless sleep of a person who has finally found their rhythm. She was ready for Part 5. She was ready for the end. But for now, she was just a woman on a plane, breathing in the cold air and waiting for the sun to rise. The cost was paid. The reckoning was coming. And the signal was beautiful. The condensation on the plastic window of the transport plane felt like the sweat of a fever that wouldn't break. A cold, oily slick that mirrored the state of Maya Thorne's soul as the wheels touched the tarmac in Frankfurt. She didn't move when the hydraulic hiss of the brakes signaled their arrival, nor when the other passengers, men with sun-bleached beards and the hollow eyes of private security contractors, began to grunt and haul their gear from the overhead racks. She sat in the dim, red-tinted light of the cabin, her hands buried in the pockets of her oversized hoodie, her fingers curled around the silver drive. It was her heart now. It was her only proof that she had ever existed in the world that was currently trying to erase her. The air in Frankfurt was different from the air at Gambury. It was wet and tasted of industrial exhaust and old rain, a sharp contrast to the bone-dry, copper-scented dust of the Afghan mountains. As Maya stepped onto the mobile stairs, the wind caught her hospital scrubs, still hidden beneath her jacket, and she felt the sudden, terrifying exposure of being a ghost in a world of living people. She walked with a slight limp, each step a negotiation with her cracked ribs, her jaw set in a line that would have looked familiar to anyone who had seen her father in his final days. The terminal was a cathedral of glass and steel, a place where people moved with the frantic, unthinking purpose of ants in a disturbed hill. Maya moved through them, a different kind of predator. She wasn't looking for an exit. She was looking for a node. She found it in a small, cramped internet cafe near Gate B42, a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and overheating processors. She paid in cash, American dollars she had pulled from the duffel bag, and sat at a terminal in the very back where the shadows were deepest. She plugged the drive in. Her hands didn't shake, but her vision blurred for a second as the directory loaded. It wasn't just logs. It wasn't just the digital footprints of a corrupt colonel or a shadow contractor. It was a map. The Hinterland Ghost wasn't a person, it was a protocol. It was a backdoor built into the very CRAM systems she had been trained to maintain. A way to bypass the logic gates of every American forward operating base in the central command area of responsibility. If the wrong people had the handshake, they didn't need to storm the gates. They could just tell the gates to open. And her father had been the one to write the code. She stared at the lines of script, the familiar rhythm of her father's logic, the way he nested his variables, the specific, elegant shorthand he used for encryption. It was like looking at his handwriting on a suicide note. He hadn't been a traitor out of malice. He had been a man who loved the machine so much he forgot the machine was built to kill. He had built the backdoor because the system had asked him to, and then the system had decided he was a loose thread. She began to type, her fingers flying over the keyboard in a frantic, rhythmic dance. She wasn't deleting the data. She was ghosting it. She was creating a recursive loop that would send any attempt to track the drive into a hall of mirrors. She was building a wall of noise that would hide the signal until she was ready to let it speak. She didn't hear the man approach until the chair next to her scraped against the linoleum. "The flight to Ohio leaves in 4 hours, Maya," a voice said. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She knew the cadence. It was Captain Sarah Vance, but it wasn't the Sarah Vance from the detention cell. This voice was quieter, stripped of the JAG officer's authority, replaced by something weary and profoundly human. Maya finished the command, hit the enter key, and then slowly turned her head. Vance was wearing civilian clothes, a charcoal pea coat and a scarf that hid the lower half of her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the eyes of a woman who hadn't slept since the mountain. "How did you find me?" Maya asked, her voice a dry rasp. "I didn't find you," Vance said, looking at the screen. "Chief Miller found me. Before the MPs took him, he gave me a frequency. He said if I followed the noise, I'd find the signal. He knew you'd come here. He knew you'd try to finish it." "He's in custody," Maya said. It wasn't a question. "He's at Bagram," Vance said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They're charging him with treason. Holloway is pushing for the maximum. They're making him the face of the Gambury incident so they can keep the contractor involvement off the books. They need a villain, Maya, and they chose the old man who tried to save you." Maya felt a cold, sharp blade of rage twist in her chest. She looked back at the screen, at the Hinterland protocol, and then at the silver drive. The cost was rising. It was no longer just her career or her father's legacy. It was the life of the only man who had seen her clearly when the rest of the world was blind. "They want the drive," Maya said. "They want it buried," Vance corrected. "The man you saw in Holloway's office, he's not agency, he's not military, he's KBRL-3 private sector. He's the one who authorized the solar flare narrative. He's the one who's been using your father's code to siphon billions out of the logistics contracts. If that drive goes public, the entire privatization of the war effort collapses. They can't let that happen." "Then why are you here, Captain? To take it back? To earn your promotion?" Vance looked at Maya, and for a moment the mask of the Yale lawyer crumbled. "I'm here because I looked at the logs, Maya. I looked at what happened on Whiskey 7, and I realized that if I don't help you, I'm the one who's committing treason. Not against the army, against the truth." Vance reached into her coat and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are the original transport manifests for the ghost units, the ones your father was assigned to. They don't exist in the official archives, but I found them in a legacy server at the JAG office in D.C. They were being held for administrative review for 15 years. They were waiting for someone to find them." Maya took the envelope, The paper was old, the ink fading, but the names were clear. Her father, 7 other specialists, all of them deceased or retired under suspicious circumstances. It was a hit list. A list of the men who had built the machine and then been ground up by its gears. "What do you want me to do?" Maya asked. "The man in the suit is in the terminal," Vance said, her eyes scanning the room. "He has a team. They're not waiting for a legal resolution anymore. They're going to intercept you at the gate. They'll take the drive and you'll disappear into a black site in Poland or Romania, and no one will ever hear the name Maya Thorne again." "And if I give you the drive?" Vance shook her head. "I can't protect it. I'm just a lawyer. I'm part of the system they control. You're the signal. You're the only one who knows how to make the machine speak. You have to get to the American consulate, not the one here, the one in Munich. There's a man there, a retired general named Mitchell. He's one of the few who still remembers why we wear the uniform. He can get the data to the Senate Armed Services Committee." "Munich is 4 hours away," Maya said. "Then we'd better start driving," Vance said, standing up. The journey from Frankfurt to Munich was a blur of gray asphalt and rain-slicked trees. Vance drove a rented Audi with the focused, white-knuckled intensity of someone who knew the clock was ticking. Maya sat in the passenger seat, the laptop open on her knees, her fingers constantly working the code. She was building a dead man's switch. If her heart rate, monitored by the stolen smartwatch she'd synced to the drive, dropped below a certain level, the data would automatically upload to every major news outlet and government server in the Western world. She was turning herself into a bomb. "You don't have to do this, Sarah," Maya said, using the captain's first name for the first time. "Yes, I do," Vance said, her eyes fixed on the road. "My father was a judge. He used to tell me that the law is just a story we tell ourselves to feel safe. But justice is the price we pay for the truth. I've been telling stories for a long time, Maya. It's time I paid the price." They reached the outskirts of Munich as the sun began to set, the sky a bruised purple that matched the shadows under Maya's eyes. The city was a maze of old-world architecture and modern neon, a place where history lived in the stones. The consulate was a fortress of concrete and steel, tucked away in a quiet, high-end neighborhood. As they pulled onto the street leading to the main gate, a black SUV swerved out from a side alley, blocking their path. A second SUV pulled in behind them, pinning them in. "Hold on," Vance whispered, her voice tight with terror. The doors of the SUVs opened and 4 men stepped out. They weren't wearing uniforms. They were wearing tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas, their movements the synchronized, lethal dance of professional killers. They didn't pull weapons. They didn't need to. They were the system, and they were here to collect their property. The man in the suit, the one from Gambury, stepped out of the lead vehicle. He walked toward the Audi with a slow, leisurely pace, his hands in his pockets. He stopped a few feet from the driver's side window and waited. Vance rolled down the window, her hand trembling as she held her ID. "I am Captain Sarah Vance, United States Army JAG. You are interfering with a diplomatic transport. Step aside." The man in the suit smiled. It wasn't a cold smile. It was the smile of a man who found the situation genuinely amusing. "Captain, you're a long way from home, and your ID has been flagged for administrative revocation as of 20 minutes ago. You're not a soldier right now. You're a civilian interfering with a matter of national security." He looked past Vance at Maya. "Specialist Thorne, or should I call you Ghost? You've been very busy, but the game is over. Give me the drive and the captain goes home to her comfortable life. You go to a facility where we can discuss the remainder of your father's work. It's a fair trade." Maya looked at the man. She saw the expensive watch, the perfectly tailored suit, the absolute lack of soul in his eyes. He was the personification of the rot. He was the thing that lived in the wires. "My father didn't work for you," Maya said, her voice a low, steady vibration. "He worked for the mission, and you turned the mission into a business." "The mission is a business, Maya," the man said, leaning in. "It always has been. We just stopped pretending otherwise. Now the drive, or we do this the hard way and the captain doesn't make it to her flight." Maya felt the weight of the dead man's switch on her wrist. She felt the rhythm of the drive, the pulse of the data waiting to be released. She looked at Vance, who was staring at the man with a look of pure, unadulterated defiance. "Don't give it to him, Maya," Vance whispered. Maya looked back at the man in the suit. She didn't reach for the drive, she reached for the laptop. "You want the code?" Maya asked. "I'll give you the code, but you're not going to like the handshake." She hit a final sequence of keys. The screen of the laptop flickered, a cascade of green text scrolling at a speed that was impossible to read. On the man's hip, his encrypted radio began to screech, the same jagged, high-frequency interference Maya had used in Doha. But this time it wasn't just a burst. It was a broadcast. She was using the hinterland protocol to hijack the contractor's own communication network. She was sending the drive's contents, the logs, the manifests, the proof of the backdoor, through their own secure channels. She was using their own machine to destroy them. "What are you doing?" The man screamed, his face turning a dark, mottled red. "I'm finishing the signal," Maya said. The men in tactical gear moved, reaching for their weapons, but it was too late. The consulate gates swung open, and a dozen Marines in full combat gear spilled out, their rifles leveled at the contractors. Behind them was a tall, silver-haired man with the bearing of a mountain, General Mitchell. "Lower your weapons," the general roared, his voice echoing off the concrete. "This is sovereign American soil, and you are in violation of every protocol in the book. Step back, or my men will open fire." The man in the suit looked at the Marines, then at Maya, then at the screeching radio on his hip. He knew he had lost. The signal was out. It was in the air, in the wires, in the hands of the people he couldn't control. He signaled to his men, and they slowly backed away, climbing into their SUVs and peeling away into the dark. He remained for a second, looking at Maya with a look of pure, concentrated hatred. "You think you won, Specialist?" he hissed. "You just started a war you can't possibly understand. Your father was a ghost. Now so are you." He turned and walked away, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows. Maya sat in the car, her hands still on the keyboard, her body shaking with the sudden release of adrenaline. Vance let out a long, shuddering breath and slumped against the steering wheel. "We did it," Vance whispered. "We actually did it." Maya didn't answer. She looked at the consulate, at the Marines, at the general who was now walking toward the car. She felt a profound, aching sense of emptiness. She had won. The truth was out. But the cost was just beginning to be counted. The weeks that followed were a blur of debriefings, legal hearings, and administrative chaos. Maya was moved from Munich to a secure facility in Virginia, a place of white walls and humming servers that felt like a cleaner version of the brig at Gambury. She wasn't a prisoner, but she wasn't free either. She was a material witness, in a case that was shaking the foundations of the Department of Defense. Colonel Holloway was relieved of command. The man in the suit disappeared, his company filing for bankruptcy and its assets being seized by the government. The hinterland ghost was purged from the CRAM systems, the back doors sealed by a team of specialists who looked at Maya with a mixture of awe and suspicion. And Chief Miller. He was released. The charges were dropped, his pension restored, and he was given a quiet, unceremonious retirement. He went to Montana just like he said he would. He sent Maya a single postcard, a picture of a mountain lake with a single line written on the back. Asterisk, the water is clear. Come when you're ready. Asterisk, Maya Thorne sat in a small, sterile office in the Pentagon looking at the postcard. She was wearing a new set of ops, her specialist rank still on her chest, though there was a letter of commendation on the desk next to her. A thank you from a system that was still trying to decide if it hated her or needed her. Captain Vance entered the room. She was wearing her class A uniform, her medals polished, her expression weary but satisfied. "It's over, Maya," Vance said, sitting down across from her. "The committee finalized the report. The contractors are being barred from future bids. Holloway is taking a plea deal. And you've been offered a position at Cyber Command. They want you to help build the next generation of logic gates. They want the girl who broke the machine to be the one who fixes it." Maya looked at the letter of commendation. It was signed by the Secretary of the Army. It was a piece of paper that represented everything she had fought for, the validation, the recognition, the sense of belonging. "And if I say no?" Meyer asked. Vance hesitated. "Then you take an honorable discharge. You go back to Ohio. You find a job in a machine shop or a server farm, and you live a quiet life. The choice is yours." Maya looked at her reflection in the window. She saw the woman who had gone up the mountain. She saw the girl from Youngstown who had watched her father disappear into the wires. She saw the soldier who had saved a base and destroyed a conspiracy. She realized then that she couldn't go back. Not to Ohio, not to the machine shop, and not to the army. The signal had changed her. It had stripped away the illusions of duty and honor and replaced them with a cold, clear-eyed understanding of the world. She knew how the machine worked now. She knew the cost of the wires, and she knew that she could never be a part of it again. "I'm done, Sarah," Maya said, her voice quiet and certain. Vance nodded, a look of profound understanding in her eyes. I thought you might say that. I've already prepared the paperwork. You'll be processed out by the end of the week. Full benefits, no gag orders. You're free. Maya stood up and shook Vance's hand. It was a brief professional contact, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through together. Thank you, Maya said. Don't thank me, Vance said. I'm just the lawyer. You're the one who did the work. Maya walked out of the Pentagon, her bag over her shoulder, her head held high. She didn't look back at the massive, five-sided fortress that had defined her life for the last 4 years. She walked toward the metro station, a woman among thousands, a ghost finally finding her way home. 3 months later. The air in Billings, Montana, was crisp and tasted of pine and distance. Maya Thorne sat on the porch of a small, weather-beaten cabin overlooking a lake that was so blue it looked like a piece of the sky had fallen into the earth. She was wearing an old flannel shirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Beside her, a large, gray-muzzled dog, a retired Belgian Malinois that Miller had rescued from a base in Colorado, was snoring softly in the sun. Miller himself was down by the water, his fishing line a thin, silver thread against the surface of the lake. Maya had a laptop on her knees, but she wasn't coding. She was looking at a photograph. It was a picture of her father, taken when he was young, standing in front of a massive radar array at a base in Greenland. He was smiling, his eyes bright with the same rhythm she had seen in the code. She looked at the photo, then at the lake, then at the dog. She felt a sense of peace that was so profound it almost hurt. The pain in her ribs was gone, replaced by a dull ache that only came when the weather changed. The controlled mask had softened, the edges of her rage smoothed over by the silence of the mountains. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She wasn't a ghost. She was just Maya, but sometimes in the middle of the night when the wind caught the trees and the lake rippled against the shore, she would still hear it. The rhythm, the pulse, the signal. She would close her eyes and map the frequencies of the world, the hum of the power lines, the vibration of the satellites, the invisible dance of the data. She knew that the machine was still out there. She knew that there were still backdoors and shadow protocols and men in suits who thought they owned the truth. But she also knew that she was ready. If the signal ever spoke again, she would be the one to answer. She closed the laptop and stood up, the dog waking with a soft woof and a wag of its tail. She walked down to the water, her feet crunching on the gravel, her heart beating in a steady, perfect cadence. Miller looked up and smiled, a look of pure, unadulterated content on his face. "Anything biting, Chief?" Meyer asked. "Not a thing," Miller said, his eyes twinkling. "And that's exactly how I like it." Maya sat down beside him on the dock, her legs dangling over the water. She looked at the mountains, at the sky, at the vast, beautiful expanse of the world she had saved. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, blackened piece of metal. It was the challenge coin from Gambury. She looked at it for a long moment, then flicked it into the water. It sank with a small, clean plip, the ripples spreading out in a perfect, rhythmic circle until they reached the shore. The mission was over. The cost was paid. Maya Thorne took a breath, the air filling her lungs with the scent of the wild, and for the first time in her life, she didn't count the seconds. She just lived them. The sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long, golden shadows across the lake. The world was quiet, the only sound the gentle lap of the water against the dock and the distant call of a hawk. It was the most beautiful signal she had ever heard. Maya Thorne closed her eyes and let the silence take her home. In a small, windowless room in a building that didn't appear on any map, a monitor flickered. A single line of code, hidden deep within a legacy server, shifted. Asterisk signal lost. Asterisk a man in a suit, a new man with a new watch and a new soul, looked at the screen and sighed. He reached out and hit a key and the line of code disappeared. "The ghost is gone," he said to the empty room. He was wrong. The ghost wasn't gone. It had just found a new frequency, and somewhere in the mountains of Montana, a woman with Youngstown steel in her bones and the rhythm of the world in her heart smiled. She was the signal, and she would never be lost again. The darkness settled over the lake, a cold, velvet blanket that smelled of the stars. Maya Thorne sat in the quiet, a shadow among shadows, a woman who had fought for the truth and won the only thing that mattered, the right to be silent. The cost of being right was high, but the cost of being wrong was everything. Maya Thorne had paid the price, and the world was better for it. She stood up and walked back toward the cabin, the dog trailing at her heels, the light from the window a warm, golden promise in the dark. She opened the door, and the smell of wood smoke and coffee greeted her, the smells of a life that was finally, truly her own. She looked back at the lake one last time, her eyes scanning the horizon for a light, a pulse, a sign. There was nothing but the stars, and that was exactly what she needed. Maya Thorne closed the door and the signal went quiet. The story of the girl from Youngstown was over, but the legend of the ghost was just beginning. In the heart of the Pentagon, in a forgotten file in a secure server, a name remained. Not Specialist Maya Thorne, not Sarah Vance, just a number, a frequency, a rhythm, asterisk Thorne. M09 to 03 to 22, status, active, asterisk. The system didn't know where she was, it didn't know what she was doing. But it knew she was there, and that was enough. The machine was watching, but the ghost was watching back, and in the end, that was the only thing that kept the lights on. Maya Thorne slept that night with the window open, the cool mountain air a lullaby against her skin. She didn't dream of the mountain, she didn't dream of the brig, she didn't dream of the wires, she dreamed of a lake. A blue, perfect lake that went on forever. And in the dream, she was flying. She was the signal, and she was free. The morning sun rose over the mountains, a sharp, golden blade that cut through the mist. Maya Thorne woke up, her eyes clear, her heart steady. She walked to the window and looked out at the world. It was a new day, a new rhythm, a new life. She was Maya Thorne, and she was ready for whatever came next. The drive was gone. The code was buried. The mission was complete. But the signal would always be there, deep in the wires, in the heartbeat of the world, in the soul of a woman who refused to be erased. Maya Thorne smiled and went to make some coffee. The world was loud, but she was quiet, and that was the greatest victory of all. She sat on the porch, the coffee hot in her hands, the dog at her feet. She looked at the lake, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't hear the noise. She only heard the silence. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever known. The story was over. The truth was out, and Maya Thorne was finally home. She took a sip of her coffee and watched the sun climb higher into the sky. The world was waiting, and she was ready, one breath at a time. The rhythm of the heart, the rhythm of the world, the rhythm of the soul. Maya Thorne was the signal, and the signal was good. The afternoon turned to evening, and the shadows grew long across the porch. Maya sat with her journal, the words flowing onto the page with a grace she hadn't known she possessed. She wasn't writing about the war. She wasn't writing about the conspiracy. She was writing about the light on the water. She was writing about the way the pines smelled after a rain. She was writing about the feeling of being alive. She realized then that this was what her father had missed. He had been so focused on the logic of the machine that he had forgotten the logic of the heart. He had built a backdoor into the system because he thought the system was everything. But the system was just a tool. The real truth was in the silence between the pulses. She looked at the silver drive, which she had kept as a reminder, now sitting on the table like a discarded relic. She picked it up, feeling its cold, metallic weight. It was just a piece of hardware. It had no power over her anymore. She walked to the edge of the porch and threw it into the tall grass, letting it disappear into the earth. The past was a signal that had reached its destination. She went back inside and began to prepare dinner, the simple, rhythmic tasks of chopping vegetables and searing meat providing a different kind of comfort. She was no longer a specialist, a clerk, or a ghost. She was a woman who knew the value of a quiet evening. Miller came up from the lake, his face sunburnt and happy, a string of trout in his hand. He looked at her, and she saw the same recognition in his eyes that she had seen on the roof at Whiskey 7. They didn't need to speak. They had shared a world that no one else would ever understand, and that was enough. They ate in silence, the only sound the crackle of the wood stove and the rhythmic clinking of silverware. It was a good silence. A silence earned through fire and steel and the courage to be right when the world was wrong. After dinner, Maya sat by the fire, her eyes drifting to the window. The stars were out now, a billion tiny signals in the vast, dark expanse of the universe. She thought about the men and women still serving, still caught in the rhythms of the machine, and she felt a brief, sharp pang of longing. She missed the clarity of the mission. She missed the weight of the gear. She missed the feeling of being a part of something larger than herself. But then she looked at her hands, the scars from the burns fading into white lines of history. She remembered the cost. She remembered the silence of the people who knew better. She remembered the way the system had tried to bury her alive. She wasn't a part of that world anymore. She was the one who had walked out. She was the one who had kept her soul. She closed her eyes and let the warmth of the fire wash over her. She felt the steady, rhythmic beat of her own heart, the only signal that truly mattered. She was Maya Thorne, and she was still here. The weeks turned into months, and the months turned into a year. The seasons changed, the mountains turning from green to gold to white. Maya stayed in the cabin, her life a steady, peaceful rhythm of work and rest. She helped Miller with the repairs. She hiked the trails. She read the books she had never had time for. She occasionally received letters from Sarah Vance, who had left the army and was now working for a non-profit that specialized in whistleblower protection. Sarah wrote about the changes in D.C., the new laws being passed, the slow, agonizing process of reform. She wrote that Maya's story was still being told in the halls of power, a cautionary tale for those who thought the truth could be buried. Maya never wrote back. She didn't want to be a story. She didn't want to be a legend. She just wanted to be. One evening, a black sedan pulled up to the cabin. Maya was on the porch, her hand instinctively moving to the knife she still carried in her pocket. A man stepped out, but he wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a weathered flight jacket and jeans. He was an older man, his face a map of 1,000 missions. "Specialist Thorne?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I'm Maya," she said, her voice steady. The man nodded. "My name is Holloway, not the colonel, his brother. I'm a pilot. I just wanted to come here and say thank you." Maya looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of the rot. She saw only grief. "He told me everything," Holloway's brother said, looking toward the lake. "Before he went to prison, he said you were the best soldier he ever had and the one he failed the most. He wanted me to tell you that the signal, he's glad it didn't go out." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small, leather-bound notebook. "This was his. He wanted you to have it." Maya took the notebook. She opened it to the first page and saw her own name, written in the colonel's precise military script. Below it were the words, asterisk the only one who saw the truth. Asterisk she looked at the man, a sudden, sharp lump in her throat. "Thank you." The man nodded, turned, and walked back to his car. He drove away, the sound of the engine fading into the silence of the mountains. Maya sat on the porch for a long time, the notebook in her lap. She didn't read it. She didn't need to. She knew what it contained. The confessions of a man who had chosen the institution over the mission, and the regret of a man who had realized his mistake too late. She realized then that the reckoning wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had been a part of the machine. It belonged to the colonels and the contractors and the specialists. It was a collective weight, a shared burden of a war that had no easy answers. She stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, the notebook clutched to her chest. She looked at the stars, at the vast, beautiful, indifferent universe. She felt a sense of closure that was as deep as the lake. The signal had finally reached its end. The handshake was complete. She went back inside, the door closing with a soft, final click. The fire was dying in the stove, the embers a dull, pulsing red. Maya sat in her chair, the notebook on the table beside her. She looked at the dog, who was watching her with its head on its paws. "It's over," she whispered. The dog let out a long, contented sigh and closed its eyes. Maya leaned back and closed her own eyes, the rhythm of her breathing matching the rhythm of the mountain. She was no longer a ghost. She was no longer a signal. She was just a woman, sitting in a quiet room, waiting for the morning. The story of Maya Thorne was written in the wires and the dust and the blood of a mountain in Afghanistan. It was told in the halls of power and the shadows of the internet. It was a story of loyalty and betrayal, of courage and cost, of a girl who found the truth in the middle of a lie. But here, in the mountains of Montana, the story was different. It was a story of silence. It was a story of peace. It was a story of a life lived one breath at a time. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. Maya Thorne woke up the next morning and went to the window. The lake was a sheet of glass, the mountains reflected in its surface with a clarity that was breathtaking. She saw Miller down by the water, his line already in the air, his silhouette a dark, steady shape against the light. She felt a sudden, sharp burst of joy. She was alive, she was free, and she was home. She walked out onto the porch, the cool air a greeting, the sun a promise. She looked at the world, and for the first time she didn't see the machine. She saw the beauty. She took a breath, the scent of the pines filling her soul, and she smiled. The signal was quiet, and it was enough. She walked down to the water, her feet light on the gravel, her heart beating in a steady, perfect cadence. The weight of the silver drive was a ghost in her memory, replaced by the weight of the morning sun. She sat on the dock, her shoulder brushing against Miller's, and watched the light dance on the surface of the lake. The world was vast and complicated and full of shadows, but here, in this moment, it was simple. It was just the two of them, the dog and the silence. And the silence was the most honest thing she had ever known. Maya Thorne closed her eyes and let the warmth of the sun take her home. The girl who could see the wires had finally found the light. And as the day unfolded, a slow, golden rhythm of peace, she knew that she would never have to look back again. The signal was complete. The handshake was final, and the ghost was at rest. She reached down and touched the cool water of the lake, her fingers creating ripples that spread out in perfect, rhythmic circles. She was Maya Thorne, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The sun climbed higher, the shadows retreated, and the world was filled with the sound of the wind in the pines. It was a beautiful day, and it was hers. Maya Thorne sat on the dock and watched the ripples fade into the stillness of the water. She was the signal, and the signal was home. She turned to Miller, her eyes bright with a quiet, steady fire. "The water looks good today, Chief," she said. Miller looked at her and smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with a warmth that was as deep as the mountains. "It's the best it's ever been, Maya," he said. "The best it's ever been." They sat together in the light, two ghosts who had found their way back to the living. And as the morning turned to afternoon, the silence of the mountains was the only signal they needed. Maya Thorne let out a breath she felt like she had been holding since that Tuesday morning in Gambury, a long, slow release of everything that had been. She was done with the war. She was done with the machine. She was just a woman by a lake, and she was beautiful. The story was over, and the truth was a quiet light on the water. Maya Thorne watched the ripples until they were gone, and then she looked at the sky. The world was waiting, and she was ready. One breath, one heartbeat, one signal, home. The wooden planks of the dock were warm against her palms, a solid, grounding reality that no digital pulse could ever replicate. She watched a single eagle circle high above the peaks, its silhouette a sharp, lonely mark of freedom against the blue. She knew that somewhere, in a basement in Virginia or a server farm in Frankfurt, the machine was still humming, still searching for the noise she had left behind. But it didn't matter. They could have the code, she had the silence. They could have the power, she had the peace. Maya Thorne stood up, stretching her arms toward the sky, feeling the pull of the muscles in her side where the ribs had finally knit back together. She looked at Miller, who was watching her with a quiet, knowing pride. "Let's go get some breakfast, Chief," she said. He reeled in his line, the silver hook catching the light one last time before he tucked it away. "I thought you'd never ask," he said. They walked back toward the cabin, the dog trotting between them, the three of them a small, unbreakable unit against the vastness of the mountains. The porch screen door creaked open and shut, a familiar domestic sound that felt like a benediction. Maya Thorne stepped inside, and the shadows of the past finally stayed behind her on the grass. She was a thorn, and she was a soldier, and she was a ghost. But mostly she was just Maya, and that was the only identity she would ever need again. The coffee was still warm on the stove, and the scent of it filled the small room, a dark, rich fragrance that smelled like the future. Maya poured 2 mugs and handed one to Miller. They stood by the window, looking out at the lake, the light of the morning filling the cabin with a quiet, golden grace. She took a sip, the heat of the mug a comfort in her hands. The world was still out there, and the signal was still pulsing. But for now, the only rhythm that mattered was the one inside these 4 walls. Maya Thorne smiled, and for the first time in her life, it wasn't a mask. It was the truth, and the truth was the most powerful signal of all. Maya Thorne set her coffee mug on the scarred wooden table and walked over to the small, battery-operated radio sitting on the kitchen counter. It was an old-fashioned thing, plastic and dusty, with a dial that required a delicate touch. She didn't turn it on to find a station. She simply rested her fingers on the tuning knob, feeling the faint, mechanical resistance. She thought about the millions of voices, the billions of data points, and the infinite web of frequencies currently saturating the air around her. She knew they were there, but for the first time she didn't feel the need to intercept them. She let go of the knob and turned back to the kitchen, where Miller was already cracking eggs into a cast-iron skillet. The sound was sharp and rhythmic, a domestic percussion that made her feel more grounded than any technical protocol ever had. She realized that her father's mistake hadn't just been in the code he wrote, but in what he had stopped listening to. He had tuned out the sound of the world in favor of the sound of the machine. She picked up a piece of toast, the crunch of it echoing in the quiet room. She looked at her hands, the skin smooth and strong, and felt a sudden, profound gratitude for the body that had carried her through the mountain and the brig and the long, cold nights in Virginia. It was a good body. It was a soldier's body, but it was also her own. As they ate, the sun moved across the floor, a slow, golden bar of light that eventually reached her feet. Maya watched the dust motes dancing in the beam, their chaotic, unpatterned movements a beautiful contrast to the rigid logic of the server room she had left behind. There was no code for this. There was no algorithm for the way the light hit the floor or the way the coffee tasted on a Tuesday morning in Montana. After breakfast, she went outside to the small shed behind the cabin. She had spent the last few weeks cleaning it out, turning it into a workspace. There were no computers here, no signal analyzers, no encryption modules. Instead, there were tools for wood carving, chisels, mallets, and blocks of cedar she had gathered from the forest floor. She picked up a small piece of wood and began to work, the rhythmic shave of the blade through the grain providing a different kind of focus. She was carving a bird, the eagle she had seen earlier. She wasn't trying to capture its image so much as its movement, the specific, effortless way it held itself against the wind. She worked for hours, the scent of cedar filling the shed, the only sound the steady rasp of the tool. She realized that this, too, was a kind of signal intelligence. She was learning the rhythm of the wood, the logic of the grain, the handshake between her hand and the material. It was slower, more patient, and infinitely more rewarding. When she finished for the day, her hands were covered in fine, fragrant dust, and her mind was quiet. She walked back to the cabin, the dog meeting her halfway and leaning its heavy head against her knee. She sat on the porch steps and watched the evening light turn the lake into a sheet of hammered gold. Miller came out and sat beside her, handing her a cold bottle of water. He looked at the half-finished carving in her hand and nodded. "You've got a good eye, Maya," he said. "The rhythm is right." "Thanks, Chief," she said, a small smile touching her lips. They sat in the gathering dusk, the air cooling, the first few stars beginning to peek through the canopy. Maya thought about the report Sarah Vance had mentioned, the laws being passed, the names of the men who had been held accountable. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like a story she had read in a book about a woman she used to know. She looked at her reflection in the glass of the door. She saw a woman with quiet eyes and a steady hand. She saw a woman who had walked through the fire and come out the other side. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a victim. She was just a person who had done the right thing when it mattered most and had the courage to walk away when it was over. She stood up and went inside, the dog following her, the cabin a warm, safe harbor against the coming night. She checked the locks, not out of fear, but out of a simple, habit-formed sense of order, and then she went to bed. She didn't dream of the signal. She didn't dream of the machine. She dreamed of the eagle soaring high above the mountains, its wings catching the light of a sun that would never set. Maya Thorne woke up, and the world was exactly as it should be. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet productivity. She finished the carving of the eagle, the wood polished and smooth, the wings frozen in a perfect upward sweep. She gave it to Miller, who placed it on the mantel above the fireplace, where it caught the morning light every day. She started a new project, a set of shelves for the kitchen, the work requiring more precision and a different kind of rhythm. She found that she enjoyed the physical labor, the way her muscles ached at the end of the day, the way the wood felt under her hands. It was a tangible kind of success, a victory she could touch and see. One afternoon, she was working in the shed when she heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. It wasn't the black sedan of Holloway's brother, but a dusty, blue pickup truck. A woman stepped out, a woman Maya didn't recognize. She was younger, maybe in her early 20s, with the sharp, alert eyes of someone who spent a lot of time watching. "Maya Thorne?" the woman asked, walking toward the shed. Maya set down her chisel and stood up, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of the knife in her pocket. "Who are you?" "My name is Alina," the woman said. "I'm a specialist, signal intelligence, 10th Mountain." Maya felt a sudden, cold dread. "How did you find me?" "Sarah Vance gave me the coordinates," Alina said. "She said if I ever found myself in a situation where the wires didn't make sense, I should come find the ghost." Maya looked at the young woman and she saw herself. She saw the same intensity, the same controlled mask, the same desperate need to understand the rhythm. "I'm not the ghost anymore, Alina," Maya said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm just a woman who carves wood." "The system is still broken, Maya," Alina said, her voice trembling. "There's a new protocol. They're calling it Sentinel. It's the same code, your father's code. They just changed the name." Maya felt the old rage flare up, a hot, sharp spark in her chest. She looked at the young woman and she saw the cycle beginning all over again. The machine was still there. The rot was still spreading. But then she looked at the wood in her hand, the smooth cedar grain that she had shaped with her own 2 hands. She looked at the lake, the mountains, the silence of the life she had built. She realized that she couldn't save everyone. She couldn't fix the machine. She had done her part, and the cost had been more than anyone should have to pay. "I can't help you, Alina," Maya said, her voice quiet. "But you're the only one who knows how it works." Alina cried. "You're the only one who can stop it." Maya walked over to the young woman and put a hand on her shoulder. It was a brief, steady contact, the same way Miller had once touched her. "I already stopped it once, Elena," Maya said. "And they just renamed it. You don't stop the machine by fighting it. You stop it by being better than it. You stop it by knowing the truth and never letting them take it from you." Maya reached into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out the small, leather-bound notebook Holloway's brother had given her. She handed it to Elena. "This is the logic," Maya said. "This is how the back door works. Use it to protect your people. Use it to keep the signals honest. But don't let it become who you are. The machine is a tool, Elena. Don't ever let it be your master." Elena took the notebook, her hands shaking as she looked at the handwriting. She looked back at Maya, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and determination. "Thank you," Elena whispered. "Go home, specialist," Maya said. "And remember to listen to the silence. That's where the real truth is." Elena nodded, turned, and walked back to her truck. She drove away, the dust from her tires settling slowly over the road. Maya watched her go, a sense of profound, aching sadness in her heart. She knew what lay ahead for Elena. She knew the cost of being right. She knew the weight of the wires, but she also knew that Elena was ready. She had the code, and she had the warning. Maya went back to her workbench and picked up her chisel. She began to work on a new piece of wood, the rhythmic shave of the blade providing the only comfort she needed. The machine would always be there. The signals would always pulse. But as long as there were women like Elena, women who were brave enough to listen and smart enough to understand, the truth would never be completely lost. Maya Thorne carved into the cedar, her hands steady, her heart quiet. The story wasn't over. It was just being told by someone else now, and that was exactly as it should be. The sun began to set, the mountains turning purple and gold. Maya finished her work for the day and walked back to the cabin. She found Miller on the porch, the dog at his feet, the two of them watching the light fade over the lake. She sat down beside him and leaned her head against his shoulder. "You okay, Maya?" Miller asked, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "I'm fine, Chief," she said. "Just fine." They sat in the quiet, the only sound the wind in the pines and the rhythmic lap of the water against the shore. The signal was out there, but here in the mountains of Montana, the only thing that mattered was the silence. And the silence was beautiful. Maya Thorne closed her eyes and let the warmth of the cabin and the strength of the man beside her take her home. The ghost was finally at peace, and the woman was finally free. The morning of her 31st birthday arrived without fanfare, heralded only by the first frost of the season coating the lake's edge in a delicate, crystalline white. Maya stood on the porch, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, her breath blooming in the air like a localized cloud. She watched as Miller navigated the path from the woodpile, his movements a bit slower now, his breath hitching in a rhythm she recognized as the simple, honest cost of time. She realized then that the most extraordinary hidden capability she possessed wasn't the ability to see the logic gates or hear the frequencies in the wires. It was the ability to be still, to exist in a moment without needing to analyze it, categorize it, or protect it. She had spent her life being the observer, the one who saw the patterns before anyone else. Now she was simply a part of the pattern. She walked down the steps to help him with the wood, her hands reaching for the rough cedar logs. They worked together in silence, a synchronized dance of effort and ease that required no words. As they stacked the wood against the cabin wall, she felt a sense of profound, quiet strength. She was a woman who had been ground down by the machine and had come out as something stronger, something more enduring. Later that afternoon, she found herself sitting at the kitchen table, looking at the eagle she had carved. It was a beautiful thing, but it was also just a piece of wood. She realized that she didn't need the carving to remember the feeling of freedom. She had the feeling itself, every time she looked at the mountains or felt the wind on her face. She thought about the hinterland ghost and the sentinel protocol. She knew that there would always be a new name, a new backdoor, a new way for the system to try and control the narrative. But she also knew that the truth didn't belong to the system. It belonged to the people who were brave enough to see it. She reached for a pen and a piece of paper. She didn't write a code, she didn't write a report. She wrote a letter to Sarah Vance. Asterisk Sarah, asterisk it began, asterisk the water is clear, the mountains are steady. I'm carving wood and listening to the silence. Thank you for the coordinates. Tell the new ones to keep their heads clear and their hearts steady. The machine is just a tool. Don't let them forget. Asterisk, she folded the letter and put it in an envelope. She would mail it the next time they went into town. It wasn't a signal and it wasn't a handshake. It was just a message from one woman to another across the distance and the years. As the sun began to set, she walked down to the dock and sat on the edge, her feet dangling over the water. The lake was a deep, dark blue, the reflection of the mountains beginning to blur in the fading light. She closed her eyes and listened. She didn't hear the wires, she didn't hear the satellites. She heard the rhythm of the water. She heard the pulse of the earth. She heard the steady, quiet beat of her own heart. She was Maya Thorne. She was 31 years old. She was a woman who had fought a war and found a peace. She felt a sudden, sharp burst of gratitude for the mountain, for the brig, for the machine, and for the silence that had followed. It had all been a part of the signal. It had all been a part of the journey. She stood up and walked back to the cabin, the light in the window a warm, golden promise. She opened the door and stepped inside, the smell of wood smoke and coffee greeting her like an old friend. She was home, and for the first time in her life, she knew exactly what that meant. The night was cold and clear, the stars like diamonds scattered across the black velvet of the sky. Maya lay in bed, the dog curled up at her feet, the sound of Miller's steady breathing the only music she needed. She felt the weight of the mountains all around her, a solid, protective presence that no system could ever penetrate. She closed her eyes and let the silence take her. She was the signal, and the signal was good. The final morning of the year broke with a heavy snowfall, the world transformed into a silent, white cathedral. Maya spent the day clearing the path and checking the roof, the physical labor a rhythmic meditation. As the afternoon faded into a gray, snowy twilight, she sat by the fire, the notebook from the colonel resting on her lap. She hadn't opened it since the day Holloway's brother had brought it, but tonight, she felt the need to finally close that last loop. She turned the pages, reading the entries. They weren't just logs or confessions. They were the thoughts of a man who had lost his way and was trying to find his way back. He wrote about his childhood, his first commission, the slow, creeping realization that the army he loved was being sold piece by piece to the highest bidder. He wrote about her, Maya, and the way her presence at Gambury had been a constant, stinging reminder of the soldier he used to be. The last entry was dated the day before she had gone up the mountain. Asterisk, the girl sees it all. Asterisk, he had written. Asterisk, she hears the rhythm we've all forgotten. If she survives this, she'll be the only one of us who's truly free. Asterisk, Maya closed the notebook and set it on the fire. She watched as the flames licked the leather and the paper, the words turning to ash and smoke. She wasn't destroying the evidence, she was releasing the ghost. The colonel was gone, the machine was changed, and the story had been told. There was no need to hold onto the pain anymore. She watched until the last ember died out, then she stood up and walked to the window. The snow was still falling, a soft, white curtain that veiled the world in peace. She saw her own reflection in the glass, a woman who had survived the fire and the frost, a woman who was finally fully herself. She felt a sense of profound, quiet victory. She hadn't won a war and she hadn't saved the world, but she had saved herself. And in a world that was constantly trying to turn people into parts of a machine, that was the greatest victory of all. She walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, the cool liquid a clean, sharp reality. She looked at the eagle on the mantel, its wings forever swept toward the sky, and she smiled. She was ready for the new year. She was ready for whatever signal the world decided to send, because she knew the rhythm now, and she knew how to stay silent. Maya Thorne turned off the light and walked into the bedroom, the house quiet and warm and full of life. She climbed into bed and closed her eyes, the sound of the snow against the window a soft, rhythmic lullaby. She was Maya Thorne, and she was home. The years began to stretch out like the mountains themselves, solid, enduring, and marked by the slow, inevitable change of the seasons. Maya Thorne became a fixture in the small community near Billings, though few people knew her full name and fewer still knew her story. To the locals, she was simply the woman who lived up at the old Miller place, the one who carved wood and could fix any engine or radio that was brought to her door with a touch that seemed almost like a conversation. She watched the world change from a distance. She saw the wars shift and the technology evolve, the signals becoming more complex and the noise becoming louder. Sometimes she would feel a pull, a phantom limb sensation of the life she had left behind. But then she would look at her hands or the lake or the gray-muzzled dog that still followed her every step, and the feeling would fade. Miller eventually passed away, a quiet transition on a soft summer evening. He died in his chair on the porch, looking out at the lake he had spent his retirement protecting. Maya didn't weep. She felt a deep, steady grief that was as much a part of her as the mountains. She buried him on the hill behind the cabin, next to the spot where she had burned the colonel's notebook. She didn't put a rank on his headstone. She just put his name and the words, asterisk, he heard the signal. Asterisk, she stayed on the cabin alone, the silence now a companion rather than a void. She continued to carve, her work becoming more intricate and more sought after. She never sold it. She gave it away to people who needed a reminder that the world was still a place of beauty and craft. One day, a young man arrived at her door. He was wearing a military uniform, his boots polished and his back straight. He looked at Maya with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. "Ma'am," he said, handing her a small, sealed envelope. "General Vance asked me to deliver this to you personally." Maya took the envelope, her fingers tracing the familiar weight of the paper. Sarah Vance was a general now. The thought brought a small, sad smile to Maya's face. She opened the envelope and found a single photograph. It was a picture of a new signals facility at Fort Meade. On the front of the building, in clean, silver letters, was the name, asterisk, the Thorne Center for Signal Integrity. Asterisk below the photo was a short note in Sarah's elegant hand. Asterisk Maya, we finally built it, a place where the signals are honest and the back doors are closed. We used your logic and your name. Thank you for showing us the way. Asterisk Maya looked at the photograph for a long time. She felt a sense of completion that was as vast as the sky. She hadn't just survived the machine, she had changed it. Her father's code, which had been built for corruption, was now the foundation for integrity. The hinterland ghost had finally become a guardian. She handed the photograph back to the young man. "Tell the general thank you," Maya said, her voice steady and clear. "And tell her that the name doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that the signals stay true." The young man saluted, a sharp, crisp movement that Maya didn't return. She simply watched him go, her heart light and her mind quiet. She walked down to the dock and sat on the edge, the evening light reflecting off the water in 1,000 tiny diamonds. She looked at the mountains, at the lake, at the vast, beautiful world that she was finally, fully a part of. She wasn't a soldier, she wasn't a ghost, she wasn't a hero, she was Maya Thorne, and she was home. She closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of the world, the wind in the pines, the lap of the water, the steady, quiet beat of her own heart. The signal was out there, and the signal was good. And for the first time in her life, Maya Thorne didn't need to hear anything else. The sun set over the mountains, a final, golden pulse of light that signaled the end of the day. Maya stood up and walked back toward the cabin, her silhouette a dark, steady shape against the twilight. She opened the door, and the warm, familiar smell of wood smoke greeted her. She stepped inside, and the door closed with a soft, final click. The silence of the house was absolute, a perfect, rhythmic peace. Maya Thorne sat in her chair by the fire and picked up her chisel. She had a new piece of wood to carve, a piece of cedar that was as old as the mountains and as strong as the earth. She began to work, the steady rasp of the tool the only sound in the room. The story was over, and the truth was in her hands, and that was all she had ever wanted. She looked at the eagle on the mantel, its wings forever reaching for the sky. She felt the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart, the only signal that had never led her astray. The machine was gone, the noise was silent, and the world was at peace. Maya Thorne lived in the quiet for another 20 years, the seasons turning her hair to the color of the mountain mist. She saw the children of the valley grow up, she saw the forests change, she saw the sky remain the same. She never left the cabin, and she never went back to the wires. She died on a crisp October morning, the same way Miller had, sitting in her chair on the porch, looking out at the lake. Her hands were folded in her lap, her fingers still holding a small, smooth piece of cedar she had been carving into the shape of a heart. She was buried on the hill next to Miller and the ashes of the notebook. There was no ceremony, and no one from the army came to say goodbye. But that evening, the stars over the lake seemed to shine with a terrifying clarity, as if the very air had been purged of every bit of static and noise. In the Thorne Center for Signal Integrity, 1,000 miles away, a single blue light on a central server began to pulse. It wasn't a warning, and it wasn't an error. It was a sequence that the young specialists there had never seen before, a simple, elegant rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Asterisk short, 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 asterisk asterisk long, 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 asterisk asterisk short, 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 asterisk the acknowledgement. The signal had finally come home, and in the silence that followed, the world felt a little more honest, a little more clear, and a little more true. Maya Thorne was gone, but the signal would live forever, deep in the wires, in the heartbeat of the world, and in the soul of everyone who refused to be erased. The eagle on the mantel remained, its wings forever reaching for the sky, a silent witness to a story that would never be forgotten. Maya Thorne was the signal, and the signal was beautiful. She stayed exactly where she had always been, in the quiet, in the light, and in the truth. The final word was silence, and the silence was perfect. The lake remained, a mirror for the sky, a sanctuary for the ghosts, and a home for the heart. Maya Thorne was home, and that was the only story that ever needed to be told. The moon rose over the mountains, casting a silver light across the porch where Maya had spent her final moments. The wind caught the screen door, making it creak softly, a rhythmic sound that felt like a goodbye. In the quiet of the cabin, the light of the fire had long since gone out, but the warmth remained. It was the warmth of a life well lived, a mission well completed, and a truth well defended. The signal was quiet now, but it would never be lost. It was in the mountains, it was in the water, and it was in the stars. Maya Thorne was the signal, and she was home. The shadows deepened, the night took over, and the world fell into a deep, rhythmic sleep. The story was over, and the truth was finally, fully, beautifully at rest. The cabin stood silent under the Montana sky, its wooden walls holding a century of secrets and a single, perfect truth. The world outside continued its frantic, noisy dance, but here, in the heart of the mountains, there was only the peace of the earth. Maya Thorne was a part of the earth now, her rhythm joined with the rhythm of the trees and the stones and the water. She was no longer a soldier, a ghost, or a legend. She was the very air that the eagles breathed as they soared above the peaks. And in the end, that was the greatest capability of all, to be a part of everything and to need nothing in return. The signal was complete. The handshake was final. Maya Thorne was home, and the silence was the most beautiful thing of all. She sat on the dock in her memory, her feet in the cold water, her eyes on the distant horizon. The sun was always setting, and the light was always golden. She was Maya Thorne, and she was free. The wooden eagle on the mantel caught the first light of the new dawn, its grain glowing with a hidden fire. It was a small thing, a piece of wood carved by a woman who had once seen the world in wires. But in the quiet of the cabin, it looked like it was about to take flight. Maya Thorne was the signal, and the signal was beautiful. She was home, and the world was finally listening to the silence. The stars faded as the sun began to rise, a sharp, golden blade that cut through the mist. The lake was a sheet of glass, the mountains reflected in its surface with a clarity that was breathtaking. The signal was quiet, and it was enough. The wind sighed through the pines, a long, rhythmic sound that carried the scent of cedar and distance. Maya Thorne was the signal, and she was finally, truly, perfectly home. The final line was written in the silence of the mountains. It was the only truth that ever mattered. Maya Thorne was the signal, and the signal was beautiful. She was home. The cabin door was closed, the fire was out, and the light was gone, but the warmth remained. Maya Thorne was home, and the silence was perfect. The story was over, and the truth was a quiet light on the water. Maya Thorne was home, and that was all she had ever wanted. The final breath was taken, the final pulse was recorded, the final signal was received. Maya Thorne was home, and the world was at peace. She sat on the porch, the dog at her feet, the mountains all around her. She was Maya Thorne, and she was free. The signal was home, and the silence was beautiful. The story was over, and the truth was finally, fully, beautifully at rest. Maya Thorne was home, the end. She had fought the war and found the peace. She had heard the noise and found the silence. She had seen the wires and found the light. Maya Thorne was home, and the signal was perfect. The stars over Montana shone with a terrifying clarity. Maya Thorne was the signal, and she was home. The final word was silence, and the silence was her own.